Well, what makes them think you're a risk management expert?
Guess it's on my resume.
Hello?
Please hold for Elaine Pettis.
You know what? I can't do this. I can't read books anymore. Books on paper ruin me, Jerry. I need that nice voice. This book has my voice. I hate my voice.
So get this book on tape.
You can't. It's a textbook. Excuse me. I'm sorry to bother you. I noticed that you have a textbook on tape. May I ask where you got that?
Reading for the blind. They can get any book on tape.
I tell you, I am hooked on these books on tape.
Don't tell me about it. These things have ruined me for Braille.
Reading for the blind?
I take an eye test, I flunk it. The next thing you know, I am swinging to the sweet sounds of risk management. Chapter 1. In order to manage risk, we must first understand risk. How do you spot risk? How do you avoid risk? And what makes it so risky? This guy sounds just like me. To understand risk, we must first define risk. Risk is a listed virtue. Stop it. We got a big problem here, Jerry. The tapes are worthless.
Kind of in the middle of something here, George. George,
I gotta run anyway.
I can't believe you feel you really need a mentor.
I just need someone who can give me some kind of direction. I'll see you.
Let's see. So what's your problem?
No problem.
And to show with your busy schedule, you'd have time to take on a protege.
I'll make time. Because Abby, I was once like you. Wide-eyed, naive. I didn't know the first thing about a subject as fundamental as risk management.
I'm not familiar with that. You'll have to explain it to me.
I'll tell you what. Why don't you read this book? And let's just see if you can explain it to me. Okay.
George Costanza is your mentor?
Yeah, he's great. I am learning so much.
About what? How to calculate 5% of a restaurant check?
You know what your problem is? You just have no respect for the protege-mentor relationship.
As a matter of fact, I happen to have a protege of my own.
Who?
Mr. Kenneth Banyan.
Banyan?
I'm gonna mentor this kid to the top.
Hey, Jerry!
Banyan!
I just stopped by to thank you. That risk management stuff you wrote for me is killing.
Risk management?
Let's go, Jerry, go. I got all these corporate gigs, and even Cynthia took me back.
Our next speaker is George Costanza on the subject of risk management.
Ovaltine. Have you ever had this stuff? Why do they call it Ovaltine? Call it Roundtine. You know what I'm talking about.
He's my protege.
Well, that's the only laughing we're gonna have with risk management. Today's class is about risk management.
Have you hit record?
I hit record before I played that, thank you. Risk management is a topic that you saw how they made fun of it back 100 years ago, and Jerry Seinfeld, however long ago that was, a long time ago. And risk management is something that's been around since the council at Sparta had a conversation about their war, and risk management's still been around. That one was recorded pretty well, and I suspect 1,000 years before that, there were still meetings around groups and tribes of how we manage risk. And so we're going to look at that from a variety of perspectives today. I've got the driest handouts that I suspect will have for all four of the modules are these handouts right here. They are 3 of the 4 international standards on risk management, and I don't have the 4th because I can't find my copy of it. And these, you have to buy these, and they're about $400 a piece for these. And some of the ones that I'm passing out in the class, they don't want us to pass out our purchased copy. So I've given you a draft copy, every word's the same, but it's not the official one that we bought. But anyway, risk management is the topic for today. And in talent development, understanding risk and teaching risk to the people on our team, if we don't teach it, what happens is we wind up taking risks as a business that we shouldn't take. We wind up getting ourselves in trouble that we shouldn't be in. And we're going to talk about risk management from a variety of perspectives tonight, some of which I'm going to take us into one of these standards to give us an exposure of what risk management really is like if you're in one of these industries. Now, every industry doesn't have the same legal requirements, if you would, to have risk management programs in place. Many do at this point in time. Many insurance companies require that we have risk management in place. At Dixie Technical College, we get audited on our risk management here on campus twice a year. And a team or an individual, depending on how well funded they are at the moment, state of Utah, they come down here and they spend a day or a week, depending on how well funded they are and how much snow there is in Salt Lake. And they go through our campus with a fine-tooth comb, and they go through every aspect of our business, if you would. And they look at things that we do that cause greater risk to the taxpayers of the state of Utah. In your business, it's looking at the things that we do that cause greater risk to the owners of the company first, to the employees of the company second. And so risk management is something that we bake into our everyday conversation if you're a manager or supervisor. And there should be anyway, as a company, talking about risk management at all times, because stuff sneaks up on us that causes us a problem. And risk management usually is tied to cash. Sometimes it's tied to safety and health, but it's usually I would say almost always one of the two. And safety and health is tied to cash. If we bleed a lot at the company, it costs us a lot at the company to do that. And so risk management is often placed under the human resources department because they don't know where else to put it. Most companies aren't large enough that we have a vice president of risk management. Now you do if you're Allstate Insurance. That's the business they're in, is parlaying risk and attaching a number to the cost of a loss. And so if insurance companies are a little bit different in terms of whether they have bigger teams on risk management than the average business. But I wouldn't expect that Stuart Awnings would have a vice president of risk management. Risk management becomes everybody's job, and it's the family's business that everybody's trying to support and protect. Papa John's corporate would have a risk management team, department, or contracted law firm that would be handling risk management for the corporation most likely, but individual franchisees may or may not, depending on what other holdings they have. If you just have one store or a small number of stores, you might not have it, and yet the requirements might be there and you outsource it as you need it. But then it's usually after the fact, after there's a problem. So give you an example of the kinds of things that risk management winds up addressing. on campus here, the Utah State Risk Management Team, which is a part of the state's attorney's office in the state of Utah. So risk management is done under the auspices of the law team, which that kind of is a little onerous right there. It seems like it'd be better if it was under the positive side rather than the protective side, but nonetheless, that's where it's at. And as instructors, one time somewhere, one of our campuses here in Utah, a instructor, it was raining late at night, a student had gotten out of a class 10 o'clock at night kind of time frame. It was raining and bad weather. Student didn't have transportation and they were walking. And the instructor said, "Would you like a ride?" Picked them up, and that turned into a lawsuit for which the state of Utah paid a bunch of money. And so risk management comes around and analyzes, why did that cost us a bunch of money? Why was that a lawsuit? And there were a number of factors. It turned out it had happened more than once as they started looking at it. One common ending was the person that was picked up was underage and the instructor wasn't. And so whether there was misappropriation happening there or not, I don't know. But the courts thought there was, and the state paid a sizable amount of money because of that decision. The other time, it was an accident. The person giving the ride got involved in an accident at an intersection, and the person getting the ride got hurt and sued the state of Utah for the event and won. And so the state of Utah risk management came back to our campus and said, all right, you can't give anybody a ride. No students are allowed in your car. And one of the instructors said, well, one of my students is my father. And so they changed the policy and said, if you are directly related to a student as an instructor, you can give them a ride. And but then they followed that up with saying how we want to handle that. If you have a student that needs a ride, and there's a circumstance like that, they're walking in the rain, and it's late at night and it's dark, and they're on the way home, you can not give them a ride, but you can call an Uber, and the school will step up in that circumstance and pay for the Uber. We would rather pay for the Uber ride than take the risk of having them get in your car and go somewhere with you. And is that the right call, the wrong call? I'm not going to weigh in and make it. That is my boss's call at the state of Utah. That's the rule, the way it is. Now, would that be the rule in my company? Well, I haven't been sued like the state of Utah has. Maybe my company would be more lax. I'm a human interest kind of person. I hate it when somebody needs a ride, and I would like to help. And I would hope that the trust relationship would be there in such that that didn't happen. But sometimes things happen that a risk occurs that we don't understand or don't know. I had a friend, I was a business partner with him at one point in time. Prior to that, he had owned a cookie company like Mrs. Fields. Wasn't as nationally big as Famous Amos or Mrs. Fields, but locally in the Intermountain area, they made a lot of cookies. And he hired kids to deliver cookies to the restaurants that sold the cookies as part of their dessert, or the convenience stores that sold them on their counter. And the van that a 16-year-old kid was driving wound up running into another van with a carload of kids, and they weren't killed, but they were injured, high medical bills. It was a bad accident at an intersection, and Dennis, my business partner, lost his company. That risk that he took, he had an illegal driver from a delivery point of view at that point in time, somebody that was underage representing his company. The vehicle was in his name. He got sued, the company got sued, and the lawsuit, the costs of defending the suit were such that they put his cookie business out of business. They couldn't afford it anymore. And that's kind of messed up. So risk management is about trying to keep that stuff from happening. What kind of things do we need to manage in terms of risk? If we're doing risk management, what are the things we need what kind of risks are there? Let's talk a little bit about those. What? So liability for where, what and where?
Having a driver under the influence,
Oh,
even if it's prescribed.
oh. That's a problem.
Actually, that can't happen because it's federal.
What do you mean?
If it's marijuana that's prescribed.
No, I'm talking about the situation that we had with Jason.
Oh, yeah.
His prescription was prescribed at the level that it was prescribed at. He was under the influence and was not safe to drive.
And it was a Schedule II, which legally, as long as his doctor was overseeing it, he could legally drive commercial. However, the side effects, one of them was euphoria and another one was dysphoria, so you get kind of like,
Well,
and I was like, that's the last thing I need is for him to end up in Tijuana, Mexico, wondering how he got there because he was just, oh wow, rainbows. So I had to pull him from driving.
wow.
So,
That's risk management. That is risk management. For an odd kind of circumstance, one that's certainly possible. Under the influence one, a company that I used to consult for, an engineering company in Tooele, they contracted to install cell phone towers for Sprint, pretty much California, Nevada, Utah, Idaho, Northwest. They had a lot of crews out building cell phone towers. That's what they did. And cell phone towers are almost always on the highest thing in the neighborhood, right? Whatever it is at the top of the mountain where it's kind of hard to get to. And a lot of times there really isn't a road. They made some of their own roads, and they used snowcats and snowmobiles and razors and stuff as everyday part of their job is what they did. And so these crews would be on the road till they got the towers built, and then they'd get to come home. And most of them lived in Salt Lake area because that's where the company was at, and Griffiths and Christensen's engineering company, so these crews would often kind of carpool to some place in Nevada or someplace in North California, where they would set camp up in campers and travel fifth wheels and stuff like that out in the middle of nowhere. Often it was kind of their job, and they got paid well to do that. But when it was Friday night, it was Friday night, and they were heading back to Salt Lake, and they'd been working all week and stopped somewhere in, I think this event was at Elko. They stopped somewhere on the trip of coming home, and game was on. They had a few pitchers of beer and wrecked the company truck. And that turned into an enormous mess. They were off duty. They were clocked out. They were out of state, but they were driving a company vehicle. And so is the responsibility there for the company, if you issue somebody a truck and they do anything in that truck, if it's your truck, it's your truck. and that all's got to come back to you, that it's your truck. Now, whether you maintain them as an employee, that's a separate call. That's up to your policy and up to your friendship with the individuals, but you will be sued, and it will be a mess. And so managing that risk is a lot easier before it happens, to say, what if, and start talking about the what ifs. Because we have a lot of not over the counter, we have a lot of prescribed medications that slow our reaction times. That's what they're for. That's what they're designed to do. That there are those of us that have physical needs that from time to time require those things. If you had your wisdom teeth out, you've required those things, and you try not to lose job hours. You don't want to call in. You don't want to get a write-up, but You didn't expect it to last all weekend. You did it responsibly on Friday and thought you'd be good by Monday, and you're not. What do? You go to work, and you run the forklift off the dock. Now we've got a problem, and so everybody was legal, and everybody was intending well, but the company's still responsible for that. So we still have to talk about that risk. What about the risk of, so we've talked about liability and some risks like these that are fairly obvious. What other kind of risks do we have and need to face as a company?
Employee risk, making sure that they're safe.
Okay, risk of being injured. So hazardous conditions and circumstances, all of the OSHA, EPA, NIOSH stuff that we talk about, all of that falls under risk management because it's our job to provide a workplace where a person's not going to get hurt. That's our job, and that's the law in all 50 states in the U.S. It's our responsibility, our law. And if we don't do that, we can be fined. If management is deemed to be willfully negligent, which means that they on purpose didn't put that guard in because it's going to cost too much, but then they purposely put their employees at risk, those management personnel that made that decision, if you can document and prove it, can go to prison. They don't often, but it does happen. We have some people from BP, British Petroleum, in prison for the Texas oil refinery explosion that occurred, and management repeatedly sat in London and said, well, it's cheaper for us to pay for the cleanup or pay for the equipment replacement and hire a few more people than it is to get it safe. And OSHA called that willful negligence, saying you on purpose knew that you had a risk and you on purpose decided as a team that you wouldn't mitigate that risk. And people died in that case. People died because of that, and that's not okay. So you as a manager that made that decision, you are personally culpable. You are liable personally. And so the senior folks on the ground in Texas City went to jail. And they're not forever, but I don't want to go to jail for a day because I willfully decided not to properly manage a risk or address it or talk about it. There's no risk in the world that is worth, first of all, that consequence, but more importantly, the consequence of injury or negative outcome to our personnel. That's not something that is acceptable, and that's not okay, and that's the law for it to be that way. I'm in favor of that law being that way. What else do we manage in risk?
They have room, we do material safety data sheets at work, actually, as relevant as it is, and go through and list every chemical we have in our whole garage and what to do if you get in your eyes or ingest it, and sort of to take the risk off us, so if a new hire uses it improperly, he can't say that we didn't show him where, and looks like ours hasn't been managed in 10 years, so they're all outdated, so it's doing that all.
Well, even MSDS is outdated. It's SDS.
SDS, yeah, that's what, we still had MSDS, and that's in 2015.
That just proves how long it's been since they updated them. And that's part of risk management, isn't it? And the law has changed in this from, at first, the law was that everybody needs to know what you have that's dangerous. And so they need to know about it. And now the law is a little bit more deep than that. We have to understand it. So we have the right to understand it. The law doesn't say that you must understand it. If you don't understand it, you can accept to say, I don't understand it, but I'm willing to take the risk anyway as an employee. Because other people smarter than me, they do understand it, and they've tried to explain it as best as they can to me, but I just don't care to mentally engage in the cell biology of me breathing that chain of chemicals. I don't need to know about how that works. I just need to know it's dangerous to breathe it. don't breathe it. I need to understand that it does bad things to my body. That's what the requirement is that we need to understand what these chemicals can and will do to us if we're exposed to it. And it's good for us to understand what to do if we are exposed, right? That's part of it too. We have liability in both of those. If we keep it a secret, Viracon introduced a gas about 2 or 3 years prior to them moving out of town. It was a gas that they put in their heat treat oven that caused the glass to be a little less wavy as it came out, because they were tempering the glass at high temperature, 3,000 degrees or something. And they put this little gas in it, and they said, oh, it's good, it's fine gas. Don't worry about it, kind of thing. Well, that causes me to worry about it. It's like, what are you hiding here? What is that pulp-like substance we talked about before class? I want to know what it is. And we have the right to know, and we have the right to understand. And I had one of their employees was in my class, this class, or the equivalent of this class at the time, and his name was Phil, and Phil said, I don't know what this is. It starts with an S. And I said, well, that's sodium or sulfur. I don't know which it is, but it's one of those. And I said, let's find out what it is. And so we investigated, looked into it, and found out what it was. And the point was that the company can't take the posture of saying, we're not going to tell you. We're not going to explain. And it really turned out at Viracon that they weren't evil people trying to harm people and not explain stuff. It turned out they didn't really understand the mechanism. They didn't understand why it was working, and some engineers in Owatonna, Minnesota, figured it out, said, try this, put a little bit of this in, a squirt of this, a squirt of that, and your quality problem will go away. And is it safe? Yeah, it's safe. And that was kind of what was said. And so the people that were asked the question didn't really have a good answer. What should happen in that case is timeout. Risk management says, you're asking an acceptable question. We owe you an acceptable answer. And that's what needed to happen. Ultimately, that is what happened with that particular one. It wasn't a dangerous gas unless you just tried to breathe only that, in which case you die. So if you get trapped in a bunch of any gas that drives oxygen out, right, is our end. We can't. If you get trapped in water, they call it drowning. And it's the same. It's dangerous if you're in that environment and that circumstances. But water isn't an SDS that freaks people out usually. We talked about water in that one web page, right? That was trying to eliminate water. I think that was a couple of you had that one. So in risk management, what else do we have that we want to look at? So safety of people, liability for the organization.
I think anytime you're about to sign a contract, be it a steel contract for fabrication or anything, there is some kind of risk going into that about knowing everything involved and knowing whether you can perform the task on time or if the penalties for failing are going to put you under. I mean, there's a risk of that.
Yeah, that aggregately adds up to looking at what is the business risk here. If I buy a truck full of watermelons and I'm going to go to the Ross parking lot in St. George and I'm going to sell my watermelons, there's some risk with that, isn't there? There are a few risks. There's a guy that sells oranges, so I'm using that as he makes trips. They're what?
The great oranges.
They're great oranges. He goes somewhere and he gets a pickup truck full of oranges, drives back home, and sits in the parking lot at Ross or Lowe's and sells his oranges. We've all seen it there. Is there risk with that business? So we say yes. What are some of the risks?
Being chased out by the police.
Operating without a license.
Yeah, there's a risk of him being chased out because he's selling something on private property, but private property that is in the city of St. George means it's under St. George laws, and you need certain vendor permits to sell stuff. And it's not that they don't give them, and it's not that they're not prohibitive, that they're prohibitively expensive. They're not. They don't give them out anywhere all the time, but we got guys selling, we got coffee trucks, food trucks, we got vendors that legally are operating, and we have vendors that are illegally operating. I suspect the orange truck is illegal. I don't know that for sure, and that's unfair for me to say out loud The guy's working hard. He's taking risks that we're talking about here. But one of the risks is he'll be chased out. What's another risk?
Nobody buys.
What if you buy this truck full of stuff and nobody buys it? That's an investment risk, isn't it? And so what if he buys them and they're all nearly out of date? He thought they were good. He sampled one. You know, it's like that. You know, that one bag of cocaine that you check out and all the rest of it's yeah, we've seen that movie, right? So there's business risk that happens there, and so we understand contractually when we do a business thing, this could come out well. We think it will. We think we'll make a profit on the watermelons. But what if the watermelons go bad? What if somebody steals the oranges? What if it's some sort of thing, COVID hits and they close the store. And I got a truck full of something, I'm looking for people, and we locked everybody down. We couldn't believe that could ever happen, but we all just lived through it. Happened, for real. And we're going, wow, I didn't think that would ever happen. I remember thinking that nobody in my neighborhood went to work today. Everybody's still at home. You saw people walking, people riding bikes, and going, wow, what is the story there? We've never seen that. I've never seen that before in my lifetime. And so that's a risk that none of us saw coming, and when it came, some businesses were suited to survive that. Many were not, right? That we saw. Some people thrive. Some businesses thrive in that circumstance. But there's business risk, that these unforeseen circumstances, and contractually it's often called an act of God. That we got all this thing buttoned up and sewed up except for the act of God. And an act of God is completely unpredictable, and whether you believe or not religiously, it means, the phrase in law just means something beyond everybody's wildest imagination is being possible, and it happened. Lightning struck through the window, and it hit you sitting in your lazy boy in front of the TV. That can't happen, but it did. All right, so that's an act of God. Now what happens with the risk management on that? Well, some stuff happens on that one, right? They always try to wiggle out of it, right? The insurance carriers I'm talking about. So that's another kind of risk, isn't it? A risk against which we can buy insurance, which doesn't make it okay, but it's one way of managing. It's a type of risk that we manage. In my house, there's a heavy risk that somebody will drive a car too fast and wreck it. And if that happens, if the bank owns the car and they're making payments on the bank is going to say, you need to have what? You need to have insurance. And it's got to be full coverage, meaning that the car gets replaced because we own it, you don't, right? And so we buy a insurance to cover a risk. And in risk management, a lot of risk management started out with just buying insurance for things we could buy insurance for. I have the risk of a heart attack. I'm too fat. Skinny guys die of heart attacks too. But just saying. You know,
From the throw that out.
go easy. They might more often even, I don't know. But so I have risk, and so what I do with that risk, I buy health insurance. It doesn't keep me necessarily from dying. It's cheaper to die than to go there. I mean, I've been with guys that crashed pretty hard and going, don't life flight me because that's $75,000 and I don't have insurance. Okay. Wow, that's a tough decision, right? You know, what do we do? What do we do in that circumstance? And we have that decision all around us, right? Medical threat is a risk, and it's something that none of us are exempt from. And when somebody gets a diagnosis in your family of anything, many of those diagnoses are $1 million diagnosis. It's going to cost $1 million to fight that. And you go, you don't even think how that's possible, but it is. And that shot that you need, that shot is $12,000, and you need one today, you need one tomorrow, you need one the next day, you need one the next day. And you go, how can that possibly be? You know, if it's my horse, it's an $8 shot to put him down. And I hate to do that. I don't want to do that. But to somebody you love, you can't do that one. So managing our health and the risks associated with health is something that we have to do. We have to do it as individuals, and companies often are the best source of that. A lot of people teach at this college right here because teachers get paid terrible, but the state health insurance is great. And so that's a benefit that attracts employees. So the employer offers that benefit to attract and retain some employees that the only reason they're here is because they got good health insurance. And that would cost them $3,000 a month for them or their family. And so that has value to them, and it costs the school a little less than that to buy it, and it's part of the package, and their justification for underpaying people, which that's fine. It's a contract that people agree to, right? Because part of what we're doing is we're managing risk in our house. That financial risk of being ruined by a medical disaster is something we all have thought about, and as you age, you will think about it more. Or as you experience somebody else that has a problem in that area, and the cost of healthcare is huge. So managing risk through insurance. Some of you might remember a trumpet player from an era ago by the name of Al Hirt. Al Hirt was a jazz musician, did some songs that cheer squads still use, kind of thing. You know, it's still old music, but jazz music. He was a world-class trumpet player, and for him to insure against risk, he bought an insurance policy for his lips. If he got smacked in the face on the train and the subway, just jostled around or whatever, smacked in the face, he couldn't play. And if he can't play, he can't earn a living. And so he convinced an insurance company to say, I'm not trying to get hurt. I'm trying to keep my profession. So therefore I want to buy an insurance policy that in the event that what allows me to play trumpet doesn't allow me to play trumpet, I get hurt so that I can't, you will pay me the kind of money I was making playing until I heal up or until I'm, whatever, not permanently disabled. That wasn't the idea. Now every insurance company didn't take that bet. And it comes with a price. That's called, insurance companies have someone called an actuarial. And that's a word for somebody that calculates the risk. They look at what is the risk. Because every time you buy an insurance policy, the insurance company has done the numbers and they are betting that you're wrong. If they sell me a life insurance policy for X dollars per month, I'm betting that I'm going to die and I'm going to need that money, and they're betting that I'm not and they're going to make the money. Right? Same thing with a medical policy. They're betting you're not going to need it, but they're going to run the numbers to say, if you did on average, what would it be? And these actuarials are recalculating risk in certain places that are prone to get hit with hurricanes. I can't even say hurricane anymore. How long have I lived here? Wow. Miami hurricanes. I know that word exists. I used to say it always. Now I can't say it ever. So when hurricane hits New Orleans, what does that cost the insurance companies? Everything. I mean, they've got everybody insured, right? Your house just got blown away. That was an act of God, but you had coverage for high winds and hurricanes in your policy. That was specifically contractually in it. So we have to cough up and pay. We were betting that it wasn't going to happen. But it did happen. And it's happening often enough that some insurance companies have redecided what they can or what they can't insure and how they write new policies. They have to honor all the old ones. Those are legal contracts. But in terms of writing new ones, we see it here locally more with flood insurance. Most insurance companies here don't include flood insurance. And if you live in a flood plain, you can't buy flood insurance because the Army Corps of Engineers is betting that it will flood there. And you bet it that it wasn't by building your house there. And it's not the city's fault that they gave you a certificate of occupancy if you weaseled around it somehow. And so the insurance company is going to say, well, If it burned to the ground, you'd been all right. So carry matches with you. Starts raining, light it up. And I didn't say that. I did not say that. But one you're covered and one you're not, right? So that's risk management on your part, carrying the matches. Matches themselves are risky. So insurance is another tool that we use in risk management. That's part of the reason that risk management normally gets assigned to the HR department. Because the HR department is helping make the decisions about what insurances do we buy as a company. And HR is involved in administering them when there are claims. If I've got medical insurance and I'm not sure what's covered, she's pregnant, but what if I got more than one she and she's pregnant too? Is that covered? Come on, you've had the question asked. I know you've had the question asked.
I've had weird situations.
Yeah, that's what happens when you're in HR and answering medical questions about coverage, because we all want to know, and we all have weird circumstances that we ask about, and HR has to weigh in and figure that out for the company, remember, because the company is helping manage risk for the individual and then for the employee as an employee of the company. So we're talking about it tonight as part of one of the things that HR needs to do. What else do we have that's risk?
Cyber risk.
Cyber risk. This didn't exist pre-cyber, did it?
Right.
And so cyber risk, we have risks with things that we don't even understand that we have risks at yet. Cyber risk is a enormous thing to try to get our arms around. It's a thing that can easily freak us out, but cyber risk is real. I know 2 companies in St. George that shut down of their servers, ransomware we called that, cost each company less than $1 million but over $100,000 just in the last year in St. George. Companies that you would know the names of. And they paid. They paid the ransomware because they couldn't afford to lose their operating brains. Couldn't have their computer shut down or taken hostage. And so cyber security, just from the practical perspective of not getting your system taken hostage, what happens if all of your financial records all of a sudden are gone? That's unthinkable for a company. What do? You're taxed to the max at that point. You have no evidence or proof of anything. You don't even know if you're profitable or in business still. It's an enormous train wreck for a company when the financial records burn up, get flooded in a safe, or get seized on the internet. And we have everything in the cloud right now, and for some it's a rain cloud. It's not what we expected, and we don't know how that all works because that has evolved, and we don't know how it all works. And as we look at things like, for example, let me think of a good example on this. Let's suppose that at security is a big thing at Dairy Farmers of America, our ice cream plant. Ice cream plants have all kinds of systems that are operating in the ice cream plant. Ours here in St. George has 180,000 pounds of ammonia in stock in the system that operates the freezer. The freezer at DFA operates based on ammonia refrigeration, which is adding heat. You've got a degree in this, so you understand it. The rest of us are kind of going, how can that work? Well, your refrigerator at your house works off electricity. Your refrigerator in your fifth wheel works off of propane and it's got flame in it. You go, how does that flame make it cold inside? Well, that's a different type of refrigeration. And it uses hydrogen and a couple other things in your RV refrigerator. You can't bring your RV refrigerator in the kitchen and plug it into the wall and have it work. It doesn't work. You got to add gas and heat to it for it to work. Different principle. Dairy Farmers of America uses that principle keep their freezers cold. Their freezers are that's the largest freezer west of the Mississippi River in the United States. That's a big, big freezer. 20 degrees below zero at all times everywhere. When they flash freeze, in the flash freeze area, it's 40 below with a 75 mile an hour wind blowing on it. Luke worked in that environment and could tell us all about it. And he's not live, so he'll have to just say, Steve, you're nuts, or something like that when he listens to this, but I think I have that completely right. It's got all kinds of interlocks because at that 75 mile an hour wind at 40 below zero freezes the vitreous fluid in your eyeball. Game over. It doesn't kill you, but it can't see anymore. And so, it's serious things going on there. So Dairy Farmers of America has a firewall, they have a computer, they have a database, they have billing, they do billions of dollars in milk and ice cream every year. Large company. I would love to get into the bank account, right? That would be exactly a move if I could do it legally. I'd love to do that. And so they protect it so that I can't. They have a firewall, right? And behind the firewall, people have limited access, but the public doesn't have any access. And same thing at your company, right? You have a firewall. You have one at home, a firewall that's protecting your secret information that's on your computer system. So at Dairy Farmers of America, these temperature systems we're talking about, ice cream has to stay frozen. So everywhere in the plant, they got temperature sensors. Every vat has temperature sensors. Because ice cream has to be liquid for them to pump it through the factory. And it has to freeze into solid. And if it freezes twice, it gets crystallized. And some of you like it better, but the public hates it. And it freezes the air that they whip into it. Because a gallon of ice cream is not really a gallon of ice cream, right? It's a lot of air. And they whip that air into it. And so they have, temperature is a big thing. Everything that the ice cream plant does has temperature sensors in it. Well, we just figured out how to make better temperature sensors. They don't have to be wired. So remember when that happened at home and your security system could go with a wireless camera and a wireless sensor in the door, and we were going, awesome. I don't have to string wires everywhere. Well, think about in a plant where it's harder to string wires. You got miles of wire that has to be strung. And if you could have sensors that just talked on the IoT, the Internet of Things, right? Where sensor is talking to sensor is talking to the controller, sensor is talking to the fan, to the blower, sensors are talking to sensors. Life is much better now. We are a better factory. However, I can pull into your parking lot. I can access the Bluetooth traffic. It's not behind the firewall. It's a radio transmission, and I can receive it, and you can't block it, or the sensor won't work. We've got that evolving in America's factory. That same series, that same Bluetooth access, ammonia can explode. Ammonium nitrate, when mixed with the right stuff. That's what took down the federal building in Oklahoma. We've got 180,000 pounds of it in St. George at the end of the runway. If somebody can get into the IoT and open valves, close valves, we can have an ammonia release. When ammonia gets released, one cubic centimeter of liquid turns into 6,000 centimeters of gas, which means that a little bit of ammonia gets released in this room, drives all the oxygen out, and we don't live. So if somebody had access to that, they could kill a lot of people. And if they timed it right with air traffic, you could take an aircraft down. Cybersecurity is an issue. And if we're looking at machines and devices that are being used in maybe the autonomous driving system in your Tesla, or maybe in the robotic knee replacement machine that the doctor's using at the doctor's office, if I could hijack those machines, I could do an awful lot of damage. And so we are being required, for the first time in world history, to have documents about risk assessment and risk management that protects us against this kind of attack, this kind of stuff. And we don't even know enough about cyber trafficking to know how to protect ourselves. And I say we as a culture, I mean as a citizenship. It's so fast emerging. I invent a protocol that nobody's used before, and all of a sudden my protocol is a secret protocol, and it's good until you hack it. And now once you hack it, you have access to everything I did because you hacked the protocol that I was using for communication. And we have companies that are facing this in spades, big time. The story is now a 20-year-old story, but when Iran was enriching plutonium, and we were pretty mad at them about developing nuclear weapons, and the Shah had just gone down, and we were trying to determine what was going on. Somebody in the CIA or some sort of intelligence agency, I'm not sure which one, I'll try to find the story to actually give you more accurate data on this, but said the spinning device, the cyclotron, that is being used for enriching this plutonium, the company that manufactures this manufactures for laboratories in the United States. It's a U.S. machine, and they're using this machine to spin an isotope and drive it into plutonium to enrich it for nuclear weaponry, to make weapon status plutonium. But it's spinning this machine that's used in a laboratory to separate DNA. It's a machine that we make. So, if we could slow that machine down, it would be impossible for them to enrich. Their plutonium process wouldn't work. They could do it, but it wouldn't work. And therefore, if we could hijack these machines, then we could prevent them from actually doing this. So they put a rewrite program for that machine on flash drives. I think they had 300 or 400 flash drives. And they scattered them around in the parking lot through an asset on the ground in, I'm making up Tehran, but wherever it was over there. And what happened was what we all do. We pick up a flash drive, we see it laying on the ground in the parking lot. What do? You see what's on it. Whose is it? You stick it into your laptop, and as soon as one stuck it into the laptop within their system, it reprogrammed all their cyclotrons. That's cool.
That's awesome.
If it's their stuff.
Right.
But if it's not my stuff, that's not cool, right? But that's cybersecurity that we're talking about. And that happened 20 years ago, maybe 30 years ago at this point, when the Shah of Iran was just after that. It's a long time ago. And so, but it's been a problem, and it's now becoming a bigger and bigger and bigger issue and bigger problem for all of us. We need to protect our stuff. We need to protect our controlling systems, whatever it is, it's controlling the manufacturing processes, our databases. All of this stuff needs controlled, or else somebody takes all our money overnight, locks our business down, out of business. And so you have to protect against that risk. That's formed an entire industry, right? And that industry is going to grow in our lifetimes in beyond recognition of what we're talking about it now, because this has become a bigger risk to every company that we have to, have to protect against against theft of our stuff, our trade secrets, our knowledge, our information, our proposals, our quotations, all of this stuff that our competitors could use to harm us. And so that's a very real form of risk. What else?
Lawsuits by maybe employees that were injured at your company, or maybe people you do business with, customers.
Just litigation, of all kinds of litigation. If you wind up working for a company, well, this litigation has lots of forms. Just as you said, an employee that gets hurt is potentially going to sue us. That doesn't automatically happen every time, but it's pretty automatic because we've got all these law firms shouting at us, on the ads saying, were you injured? Were you injured? If you were, you need to call us. One call, that's all. And you name the attorney, but they're all advertising for that, which is making it easier and easier for us to get sued. And some of those suits are frivolous or without merit. Most of those personal injury lawsuit lawyers won't take those cases. They only get paid if they win, and so they take cases that they want to win, or they're pretty sure that they can win. But that still doesn't mean that we don't get hit with lawsuits that are unfounded. Or I mean, anybody can sue anybody for anything, and when that happens, there's risk to us, and there's risk that some of it we can manage and some of it we just have to defend. We can't manage it before it happens, we just have to defend it. So that's a good one, lawsuits in general. The lawsuits almost always name the HR department as part of the suit. Why would that be?
Because they're the ones that make the policy.
They enforce policy, they don't always make it, but they have access to all of the personal data and the information on the company. And often they provided a communication clearinghouse with the employee that's engaged in the lawsuit. So HR is almost always drug into it at some point. Now they may not be the target, but they are some of the collateral damage. And if you work in HR, it's not unusual to get named in a lawsuit. And sometimes those suits, if you were involved and the attorney is saying you made a promise in some way that was out of bounds, then they may require the court to require you to hire your own attorney in addition to the attorney that the company is going to hire, and they may try to stipulate that the company is not allowed to pay for your attorney. You have to pay for your own because you were personally responsible for what, that's their claim. Judges probably disallow that more often than they allow it, but on some occasions they do allow it. So that means on some occasions you may be involved and named in a lawsuit, and you may have to go to your family and say, we have to hire and pay for a lawyer. The company can't do it for me. And that's a bad conversation. I've had that conversation, so I know that one firsthand personally. And that's not a fun one to have, or you're gonna have to write checks, and you're gonna have to start having your attorney. And you'll fight it, and you may get it turned around, but you may not. And so that could be a career impacting problem that you have to deal with. What other kinds of risks?
Inventory.
Risks to the inventory?
Yeah, like employee theft or excess inventory.
Yeah.
Supply chain failure has been happening.
Okay, so you're on a whole topic of risk here that has to do with inventory. We have the risk of the inventory rotting, being damaged or getting damaged. We have a risk of the inventory being stolen, taken by in-house or the neighborhood thugs or somebody. And when you're trucking things like you guys do regularly, oddly enough, Flying J is the scene of many crimes. Truck stops, there's lots of theft that goes on at truck stops in America. And when you think about it, there's, a truck full of electronics is worth a few $1 million. And trucks that are just full of beer have a lot more beer in them than you'd think. The ice cream trucks have about $100,000 worth of ice cream on them, in just ice cream. Now, the Andresses on numerous occasions had their trailers stolen. There's a Budweiser plant in Vegas, and they haul for Budweiser, and there are people in Vegas that like beer. And if they know beer's on your truck, they'll hijack your truck, and in a very short period of time in some neighborhood, they've opened the back of it and they're selling beer out of the back of your truck, and it's refrigerated. It's cold beer they're selling out of your truck. And by the time you catch them or the police catch them, beer's gone. And they're happy to give you your trailer back at that point, because and you think that couldn't happen. That has happened to them more than once. And we get better technology, we get faster in our response, we get faster tracking, and I understand we're trying to face that risk, we're trying to manage that risk, we're trying to make it go away. But you go, how could that be? How could we have risk to our inventory through theft? And the answer is we do. And even if that inventory doesn't seem to be of value, people steal weird stuff, and they either think it has value that it doesn't, or they just had a chance to steal it and they're just stealing something, and maybe all they need is $20 for a blow. You don't know why they're stealing something, and maybe think they can trade it, just to get another, fix. And that's a real driver that causes a fair amount of crime in the U.S. But that's risk. What else?
We have a lot of chemicals in our disposal of our waste, I guess, sometimes.
Okay, a risk of how we manage byproduct from production. And a lot of times that byproduct of production could seem innocuous, but it could be dangerous. And it could be something we have to pay money to deal with and to manage. And it could be something that we didn't even think was a big problem. We vented it out into the air and we get fined for that. Somebody rats us out and we get caught. We bury it, and it turns out we can't. And some reputable places here in St. George have had issues with that one. Lighthouse Food is one. They buried some waste in their water treatment plant, strung it out. They thought it'd dry out and turn into fertilizer, and turned out that was illegal for them to do at that time in that place without permitting. And so they got fined. Nobody went to jail, but they got fined for it. And so dealing with things that we have, chemical things or just byproducts in general. We can't just throw stuff away, open the drain, pour it down. Even if it's stuff I could drink it, it could still overload the waste system. Ice cream is an example. Ice cream down the drain is fine, you can eat it. But it clogs up the enzymes in the water treatment plant, and they will send you a big fine for putting total dissolved solids over a certain limit down the drain. And Lighthouse and the ice cream plant have both been victims of that. The ones that I heard about, that I knew about at the ice cream plant were $65,000 per month fines for not having the water cleaned up, and it was all stuff you could eat. It's just fine. It wasn't toxic chemicals. It was toxic to the enzymes that they use in the treatment plant, but it wasn't toxic to you and me. So knowing what we have and managing that is part of risk management, knowing what we've got there and properly taking care of, cradle to grave, the stuff that we generate with it stuff.
Licensing and like improper licensing or like messing with the IRS, those are risky.
Okay, those are two really two different things, and they're two really big risks. If we are supposed to have certain permissions to do anything, that falls under the category of licensing. Knowing what we need to be licensed for, knowing what we need to be doing, is risky. If we get it wrong, it's costly to our business, and it could be illegal to our business as well as just having it, not understanding and getting it wrong. So licensing on some jobs has to do with credentials of personnel that are on the job. It could be permitting properly to do a job. We have swimming pool guys that come and dig your pool.
CPO.
What are those guys called?
CPO.
I don't know that.
Certified pool operator.
Yeah.
What's that do?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That would work. That was a term I'm not familiar with. You have to have a permit to put a pool in your backyard. And in most jurisdictions, not every, but in most jurisdictions, you have to have a permit to do that. And there's a certain amount of pool companies in St. George or Washington County that will put a pool in without you having that permit. And there are others that won't, because as a contractor, they can get in big trouble for working on a job that doesn't have the proper permits in order to do it.
Oh, sorry, I meant maintain it, since I maintain
Oh,
it for
okay.
like the public that can go.
Oh,
there
yeah, those
to
guys
do
need
the
certification.
chemicals
That's another licensing.
Yeah.
That's exactly
So
right.
sorry, not to
Yeah,
do
so
that.
if you are floating in a float spa, you've seen those bubbles where you go and pay money to float in water, a mud puddle or whatever it is, and so those places have to have a license that can keep you alive if you panic and start breathing water, and they have to have certain licensed people on. It can be one, not people plural, but at their facility. Public pools have to have certain life capabilities at the pool. You have to have licenses to do that in certain jurisdictions. We call them a lifeguard in some cases because they've got a certificate to do certain things. It depends on the jurisdiction we're talking about. But that's a risk management thing that we need to know about and a hoop we need to jump through. What else?
Losing face or reputation. Like it's kind of like an intangible thing, but anytime you're doing a job, there's always that risk of, well, if we mess up, we might lose reputation, which will cause plenty of problems later down the line.
This is a huge risk. How many times have you heard politicians say one thing wrong and all of a sudden the campaign swings? How about a TV or sports announcer that says one thing wrong and loses their job, not just their reputation, but they lose their job. We had a NFL color commentator one year, it goes back far enough, probably most of you don't remember it, although he's still on the air, got caught with women's pantyhose in his hotel room. Well, that one little problem cost him his job for a while. He eventually got it back, but it's like, that's not our business. It is intriguing, I have to say, but it's not our business. And you know, one thing gets out, so the damage to reputation as a sports announcer, that has nothing to do with the skill sets as a sports announcer. Saying one joke that's an improper joke can cost a person's career. A company's reputation can go by a misstatement. And we've had companies apologizing for what one person in the company, often the CEO, what they say is contrary to saying, wait, hold on a second, that's not what we really mean, that's not what we really think. And sometimes there's risk. We heard on 60 Minutes 2 days ago, we heard President Joe Biden say that we will, as American and as American soldiers and as American military, we will fight China if they invade Taiwan. We heard him say that. That is not U.S. policy. U.S. policy is to stay neutral. I'm not weighing in as what the right or wrong thing is. This is an example of risk, where the president of the joint says something that's contrary to what the joint is thinking, whether it's your company or our country. Now, he didn't mean bad. In fact, he probably meant well by that. And I think in the spirit of things, we have sent messages forever that we intend to defend Taiwan if China tries to take them away and take away their freedom. And we've said that through a number of administrations since the 1940s that have said that in one political perspective or the other. But what was said Sunday night was directly in conflict with what our official our policy is on that. So managing that is managing risk. And we have, you know, people that try to write speeches for people so they can run it past enough people to think, what are you saying? So we're not getting up there and winging it and getting our stepping in it. We all have stepped in it verbally where we've said something we didn't mean to say. You've heard maybe 100 of those in this class where I didn't mean to say that, and I go, well, I didn't say that. And you can't take your words back. I can say I didn't mean to say it, but it doesn't take the words back. Once a faux pas occurs, we have the risk that we have to maybe manage that in some way. It may damage our company. And so in some cases, there is the risk that's similar to this. If I have a business where I set up distributors, I am now dependent on what the distributors say and claim about my company and my product. They're not me. They are my distributors. They should be distanced away. And yet, am I liable for what my distributors say? That, careful on your answer, the answer is yes, I am. They are my distributor. I authorized them as a distributor. I didn't authorize them to do this mess, but by the fact that I authorized them as a distributor, I have certain risks that I have taken on by signing them up. That's why some companies are really, really cautious about how they sign up distributors and what terms they give those distributors, because it trickles to the original company. And so that risk of managing reputation becomes such that I set policy to protect my reputation. And it could be about what people say, and it could be, we talked about the Budweiser contract, they have a thing that there's no holes in the semi-truck. That the trailer, no ratty trailers, and they inspect the trailer, and if the trailer doesn't cut their standard, they won't allow it on the property. I mean, it's inspected off property, and it doesn't allow it to come on the property at a brewery, which isn't it's anyway, and because that's their reputation. They want the reputation that we are a professional company doing, sterile food product that's not going to hurt you, other than you may drink yourself to death, but other than that, it's not going to be a problem, and they don't want that reputation that they're ratty based on the truck that a supplier or a transporter shows up in. And so they take risk to that level of risk of their brand, risk of the perception of their customer base. They don't want to damage that risk. Walmart requires drivers that go to Walmart stores to carry a crisp white shirt in the truck, and before they get out of the truck to deliver their load, they're supposed to change shirts and put on a crisp Walmart shirt that looks good and smells good. and because Walmart wants to protect the image that they believe they have developed. And I'm not weighing in on that one way or the other. I'm just saying that's their policy. And that's risk management of what you think of their company. So it's something that has to be considered as risk management. What else? We've gone almost to break time.
Based on appearance.
Say that?
On my monthly bonus sheet, they put 5% of my bonus as my appearance, which is interesting.
Wow.
It seems weird. I'm like, can they do that? But it's part of my
Can they
stuff.
do that? Let's answer that as a question. What do you think? Can they do that?
They sure can.
They sure can. It's not a contract, so you have to achieve to a certain.
Or I guess it's supplemental.
Did you agree to it?
Well, I guess it's supplemental. I don't know.
It was an agreed to contract.
If you want that bonus, you have to dress accordingly.
You agreed to it. And the answer to that is yes, we can. Where we can't do it is if it's not fair and across the board fair. The girls have got to all look sharp, but the guys don't. You go to jail. That's not okay. You can't say that. But in terms of dress code or image, or even if it's arbitrary like that, you got to look good. Well, what is looking good? What I think looks good, what somebody else thinks looks good, they tell me to cut it off. And maybe I should, but this is not their decision unless I agree for it to be their decision. I could go to work for a place that says you got to have a haircut up to here, and if I agreed to that, then I'd have to have a haircut up to here. United States Marine Corps is one of those. I can't keep my own image there. I agreed to theirs, and that's legal. What it is, it's fair, and the legal term is it must be fair and even-handed. That means it must be reasonable, but it has to be reasonable to everybody that is agreeing to that. You can't just have something that is slandered or biased or discriminatory or anything like that. So yeah, your boss can do that, and not a bad idea, I don't think. I think that you see some companies. We've been talking car washes in here, and we got the quack guys. Is my phone trying to answer a question here? Okay, Google, I didn't understand that. Well, maybe that means it's time for break when Google doesn't understand it anymore. I think it almost is a time for break. The quack car wash people are dressed how? Has anybody seen how they dress? You got a tie on. I thought I was the only guy in Washington County with a tie on today. I'm not. The car wash people have a tie. Why?
Image.
It's their idea of an image. It may not be my idea of an image.
Why didn't they name it a cooler name then?
Quick quack.
Quick quack with a tie.
Quick quack with a tie. I know. The name is interesting because I've said it wrong every time in this class. If you haven't noticed that, I kind of purposely do that at this point because I think it's a bad name as well. But that's not fair. That's not fair to the company. That's not a fair reflection. It's their fault, though, that they picked that. You know, and I'm not sure, what.
And you think if they named it that, then they have all their employees wearing like childish things, not professional
Yeah, like
stuff.
Donald
Like
Duck
that seems
costumes.
kind of like a weird name to have everybody dressed like
With the white shirt and tie.
businessmen, like
Yeah.
have them wear bright, colorful shirts.
But in one way, the interesting thing about that is we just spent 10 minutes in class talking about it. So is that a corporate win? It might be.
Mhm.
Because we weren't talking about Tag and Go, which is just as bad a name.
It's way better, car wash. The Quick Quack and Hurricane stinks, their water's rotten.
Uh-oh, this
Yeah.
is a problem.
It's very rotten,
Yeah,
and
that's,
it's very
that's,
bad problem.
that's gonna be a problem anyway.
Mhm.
All right, we talked a lot more and we never got to the one I was looking for. We have to manage the risk of our products. Making a product that goes out and hurts people or does something, corporately we have enormous liability of that. Ask the tobacco companies. They have withstood 30 years of lawsuits, more than that, but since the government settlement, they're still paying out billions of dollars for hurting people. And so risk management includes managing our product, whatever it is that the service that we're selling, the product that we're selling. And that's a huge part of risk management, actually.
We have to put a Prop 65 sticker on everything that goes to California.
You've got all kinds of new things there, you know. But if you started making wall beds out of CBD,
Yeah.
maybe, I don't know. We could use CBD oil on the wall beds.
You don't do that.
You get them in California better, but
Right.
that's all. So it is definitely time for a break. We're going to come back and talk a little more about risk management. I want to watch a couple of videos, and I want to take you into a little bit of these documents. These are called nasty documents because these are legalese kinds of documents. And if you don't work in a company that has documents like this already, you will at some point in time. So I want us to familiarize ourselves a little bit with what these are about before we're done with class today. So let's take a break right now. If you didn't pick up one of each of those on the way in, grab one now because I'm going to refer to several of them side by side when we come back from break.
All it would take to shut down the 40 plate angle line door drill is a single flash and about 40 minutes of work on my end. No longer support.
It is, but that's going to
Because the computers and machines don't support anything.
since
But yeah, no, it would take a flash drive about
That was
40
something.
minutes of work. And I can
That was a decision you guys made.
Okay. At least clean wipe them all.
CP responsible for that stuff.
The only
I
other
haven't
thing
seen it
is
since then.
the server.
But getting those
Getting
printouts
server
from you
access to the dock is,
during those 2 months
I
that
mean,
we
as
had
long
those
as you don't have
printouts,
the access
for it
on
to
the
get to
server
work quite a bit.
from there,
And I think it would be good to have
so the
those.
access to all the
Right.
payroll, all of the families.
Either way,
that are
whatever's
connected
easiest for
to
you.
that server,
But I want
so
to get
that
back to
jump
that.
and fan servers on the
Yeah.
I mean,
That's the only
it's a
thing,
living legend in the shop.
when I think about what has changed over the past 3
That
months,
was mentioned by
is
John.
the only thing I think about that has changed significantly.
When you have a P drive that has like data on it and that's it, like, if there's a family drive, I don't totally for those.
What do we do today?
John's special.
Gotcha.
Shared with you, and if that's the case, I could just send you the link and you can just pull it.
That would be great.
Because then that way, it's not me delivering something to you.
Sure, it was just something I've got
It's
access to.
something I have access to.
Sure.
So it's faster, quicker, and easier on everybody.
That would be great. Can you also share it with Brian?
If I have his email address.
Okay, I'll get it to you tomorrow, okay?
Definitely.
Or I'll just, do I need authorization to share that with him?
I don't know, I think what I shared with you was just a.
So his is just,
Set a reminder.
so it's just Brian, and we'll verify one of them.
on Thursday.
Yep.
I was wondering if it'd be okay if I'd be able to come in about like 6:45. I got a 150 pizza order that I have to make.
Awesome.
So I was just
Yes.
double checking.
Get her done, get her done.
Okay.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
That'll make your cash receipts for the day be pretty
Oh,
easy.
yeah. Pretty much almost a full day, I think.
I'm sorry, say that again? I got a note back from them that said I need to use a different form, requested, samples, internally is my, so I filled that form and sent
The
it
wrong
back.
view and they glossing it and painted it, and I was cutting it on the saw.
Still done, still done.
I go up there and
I filled the right form out.
the channel
and sent it
is
back.
coming out
See that.
at the end, so I'm cutting.
Get it done.
And I was like,
Why
oh,
did you
that's.
paint it first?
Well, because we're allowed to get back to that, so they paint, there's a pass. And then I told them, hey, I took it off. I don't know what the plan is, but I was like, oh, it's just coming out at the end of the week.
Mm-hmm.
So you put it in all day, and then, was it today, they had it all stacked up outside. I go to pull it in, put it in. The paint's
Put it
gone.
over it?
No, it's actually fit it up and roll it back to that. The paint just comes right off. It's supposed to ship out tomorrow.
When's it coming off? Is it not tomorrow, right?
Not finally yet,
Or
right?
just let me know. The roof came off, so it was like closed.
No, I think part of it is just like, because it's a rush job, no one giving the time to cure. Quickly clean and conservation. But the key on that shit is just like, gotta make a promise on some shit. If we literally think we can get it out, try it. Well, no, for that stuff,
That's not on.
you have to change it to.
You want to share on it before it. Okay. So, I'll send you.
I find funny was not cybersecurity.
Transition,
Literally, as soon as this dude was there, one of our machines.
No, I just pull it up. BRY. No, that's fine. Either way, I think it's good for him to have access to that information, even that, because I would have a copy about, the issues that we've been having. Maybe we can ask him about that chart. Well, it will definitely help, and it'll keep it forefront of his mind, it's something he can check, whatever. He can see where his guides fall short and what he needs to do to bring it back up. And it will give me an extra tool, to help monitor progress.
I can do another one that is monthly, if you want me to, for all departments. Billy, majority of our members are either shipping or labor.
Right.
You get dedication, production, and finishing, you get.
Right. Well, I think that, for right now, let's just start with the glaring issue, right? And then, as we progress, if those things start to become a bigger problem, yeah. I think a lot of the stuff coming out of other areas like, drawing issues, assembly issues, parts prep issues, like the issue that Glenn had today with the missing that route on the sideboard. That was, I don't remember the last time we had one of those.
When we start doing like a route on the sideboard,
Running the edge battery, right, yeah. But the goal is, first and foremost, take care of the customer, right? And second, to reduce the stress that you and Glenn are feeling. Sure. Well, and it's not gonna do anything but benefit the company, right?
I got you guys started, we just texted me in class what the dress code was, so. Really serious about starting.
That's great. That's great. That's good.
So,
Right. Right. Well, I'm gonna do my part. Good. Fantastic.
And even with the issues that I was having with the installers, and having them journal their days. So I know what problems they had, how much additional equipment it takes. So before you say, oh, I had an extra hour to install, but no, you know what's going on.
Right. Right. Well, that information, if you can compile that information, if there's anything that would be beneficial to cut those times down that we could do, that would also be helpful. Right. You know, right, and a lot of those, unfortunately, because those bolts are the same color, they're the same thread pattern. If somebody's filling up buckets and they're not paying attention, because they are right next to each other, one handful of oops, and now you have 6 beds, 7 beds that we're gonna have problems with. Yeah, that's actually now that we're talking about it, that's probably a fantastic idea. Right. Right. Yeah. Wonder if we can get them in different colors. If they're manufactured in different colors. Yeah, if you're just quick. Right, but it would be nice to go red and black. Brown, yeah. That would, I wonder if we could do that. Yep. Yeah, because that would, I think that would help a lot. They do really good with visual, yeah. Well, they do really well with visual cues, right? That might be something to look into. Yeah. Something. Yeah. Because I can see it happen. I mean, it happens all the time. Where they put 1.5 inches in the 1.25 inch bucket, and then we go to mount something, and then all of a sudden, right through the desktop. Sure. Yeah. Well, for those that have worked around those instruments for so long, you can pick them up and go, nope, that's 1.5 inches. Nope, it's like really quick, right? Right. Right. You may have pulled it out of there, but it's not what it's supposed to be. Yeah.
All right, I think everybody didn't leave on break. Some of them just talk business all the way through it. Thursday is our day. We're starting on your assignment of giving your PowerPoint presentation that you prepared. A number of you turned it into me weeks ago, and if you polish that back up and drag it out and be prepared to give it in some sort of presentation form. Does not have to be PowerPoint, even though we call it PowerPoint. It can be a different trade name, one of the free ones, Prezi, or one of those that's out there, or your own version of just a sequence of slides, photographs that you just sequence. It doesn't matter, but it is some sort of presentation that you give. I didn't give a time limit to it, and was on a topic of your choice. And so we're going to start that on Thursday. If you're coming in late after having made 100 pizzas or whatever that is that you've got on there, 150, whatever that is for the order, that's a great order. Do your thing. Join us when you can. And the rest of it, we forget to everybody, we don't have to do you on Thursday. The following Tuesday, a week from today, will be okay for overflow. Because we have another topic to talk about that day. We are getting close to the last day of this module, this course, and so close that I have got your certificates. We're trying to redo our certificate thing. Josie, here's your certificate. I haven't signed it yet, but I have one for all of you. It looks like this. It's a new look on our certificates, and we are trying to get faster, more responsive in how we do our certificates. You know, when we talk about continuous improvement, that this happens for everybody. We've had students that have had to call us and beg for their certificate because our system was broken. We just didn't have a very good way we were issuing, and that's kind of what it's all about, right? It's having the credential and the certificate. In this course, you're earning one for each course that we finish, and you have to pass. But assuming you do that, then I'll try to hand it to you on the last day of class. And if you're not able to be here on that day, or if you're in Denver, we'll mail it to you. But anyway, that's coming along. Don't forget the homework assignment so that you are prepared on Thursday or Tuesday if necessary. We're going to talk about a few things that are redundant with what we talked about in class. So I'll go through these slides quickly, and then we'll watch a video or two that I want us to talk about, and then we're going to point you to a couple things in those documents. What is business risk? We talked about business risk. There's the risk of suffering harm or loss is what the word means. Business risk, if we can have a loss associated with assets and earnings potential of the firm, that's our business risk. That's a truckload of watermelons we talked about. There's a market risk. We didn't talk about that. We only said, what if nobody wants to buy my oranges? That is market risk. I didn't talk about that more. How many companies have we seen develop or invent this wonderful product they think, and nobody else thinks so? And the market just doesn't want what they did, or the way they came up with it, or the way they're packaging and promoting it. And we have talked about a few of those businesses in this class because they're here in town. They come up with something and they didn't calculate the market risk itself. We cannot usually buy insurance on that. Pure risk itself, the risk of you crashing your truck, that's a risk of loss only. It's not a risk of gain. And so we can't insure risks of gain. Otherwise you'd buy stock and a policy to insure, or you'd bet on Thursday Night Football and a policy to cover you if you lost. So you can't buy insurance on gain. That's just not the way insurance works. And if you do make gain out of insurance, usually that's illegal, and you usually eventually get caught, and we see you on 60 Minutes or something, because of your scheme that you have. Pure risk is the only thing that we can buy insurance on. We have real property. There's risk on that, flood, wind, smelling bad, whatever kind of risk we might have. Personal property, we have risk on personal property of our equipment in the building, and risk associated with it. What happens if the machine blows up and it hurts somebody? What risk is there of that happening? You go, well, there's not much for that kind of machine, but if you're racing in Las Vegas at the racetrack, if it's a quarter-mile drag races, the car next to you comes apart, it might hurt you. That you signed a waiver for when you entered that race, right? They're not liable for if the car next to you blows up. Replacement value of property, actual cash values in terms of insurance companies use. It involves depreciation in most cases, and will offset that way than the actual cash value. Peril is the thing that causes you to lose, and a direct loss is something that you can support to usually the insurance company. The indirect losses are difficult to prove. It's the loss of opportunity. You know, if you had to be shut down for 3 days this weekend, what would that opportunity to be in business have netted you or brought you in had you had the opportunity? And if somebody costs you that opportunity, often that's hard to insure against, and it's hard to, somebody sabotages your food truck and flattens the tires, and you're not at a place where you can sell stuff, you've lost opportunity. And so tough for us to insure against that gain we would have gotten had we been there. And so that's a risk we want to manage in different ways. Those that are in HR are already up to the waist in workers' comp rules about when and how and what you pay, and the claims and the abuse of workers' comp. We can't answer the question in an interview, have you ever made a workers' comp claim? That's an illegal question to ask to protect the frail, or something. I'm not sure who it protects exactly. But it does, we can't ask that. But it is true that there are people that have a pattern of filing workers' comp claims. And often those people are just unlucky and they're hurt. But sometimes some of them are fraudulent. And we probably know some of each. You know.
Some of them are really premeditated over a series of like 20 years where they'll make claim, longest list of claims, and could like 20 years later say my back problem now is because of what I did, 18 years ago. And I mean, we have certain employees that it's really obvious. But you can't really do anything about it.
No, you can't. There's, pain is one thing that's very difficult to measure and prove. Whiplash is something we've all had to one degree or the other. Hopefully we've had a mild degree of it. But it's something that if you say you've got it, you've got it. A doctor can't prove that you do. You can act stiff. You can act like you're in pain. You can wince. But there's no medical machine that says, yep, there's pain. We can measure nerve traffic, but we can't say that it's pain traffic. We don't know how to identify that yet. Medicine will get there someday, but we don't yet. So false claims against pain are easy to make and very difficult to prove that they're not real. And so that's just life. That we can't change that piece of life. That is life. Abusive people will abuse it. Those of us that would rather, be ethical will be ethical. And that's a character choice that you make, and I can't tell you what is right or wrong for you. But abusive workers' comp, I was involved in trying to figure one out for a company named Autoliv. I've talked about Autoliv before. Autoliv is a large employer they're a large employer, first of all, but in Utah they have a lot of employees. And in Utah they were having extremely high workers' comp claims for carpal tunnel syndrome. So people that couldn't, they were folding airbags, and it was repetitive motion for sure. And they had robots everywhere they could, but there was still a lot of manual work that was being done. And a lot of people were reporting injuries with their wrists and were getting surgery. And enough so that they said, we got to fix this problem. We got to figure out what do we need to change? How do we need to not hurt our people? They first took the approach that they were hurting their people. And later we discovered that the word was around, they were hiring through temporary services at first. And temporary services can be hurt and file workers' comp claims, just like a full-time employee can. And so the word was going around Ogden that if you need your surgery, get on the temp service and get on at Autoliv, and as soon as you're on at Autoliv, file a claim. And it was hard for us to document that was what was being taught and what was being told the community, but we actually did get people that were willing to sit in deposition and admit that that's what the word was going around. So they had a spike of hundreds of workers' comp claims for carpal tunnel syndrome, and the word just kind of was around. And if you were in the workforce, that if you hurt, and you've done repetitive motion sometime in your career, you can get it surgically fixed and you can get it paid for by the company, and they can't prove that you didn't get hurt there. And so that's kind of what happened. That was a true case. I was involved with that one, trying to
We
figure
had
out.
a really ugly one where we had an employee who got in a motorcycle accident going over 100 miles an hour in the Hurricane Fields. And we all felt bad for him, you know, people pitched in, paid for him to get by while he was recovering. The company did and the employees did. And then he came back and he was really addicted to painkillers, and he went like, probably a year later, came into work and then went and sat in his car and said that he'd hurt himself at work, claimed a workers' comp injury, and we have everything filmed all day long. Couldn't figure out what it was that he had done, you know, couldn't find any evidence. So workers' comp went through this with us to try and resolve the claim, and we went to court, and his grandparents were really pushing it that we had basically disabled him there at work, even though he had just like a year and a half or 2 years before almost killed himself on his motorcycle, you know. So then we get through that, and we came out okay. I mean, we ended up paying him some money, but for some partial disability, but then he ended up killing himself. And then his grandparents sued us, saying that we caused his death. It was just ugly, and we had from the beginning tried to be really supportive and help him out, you know, it's just sometimes you cannot win.
No, that's tragic, and that's tragic not out of negligence on the part of the company. It's human tragedy, and we do have a
Just all
certain
the way
amount of that
around.
around. Yes, all the way around. Grandparents that were changed forever and hurt, and you know, that was, there were no winners in that at all. But the case, the point that you're making is they come after the deep pockets.
Yeah.
It's like, let's go after the family that owns a big company
It
in
could
town.
have turned out pretty bad, but I mean, we've
Yeah.
had everything covered pretty good on our end, but you just don't wanna have to go through that, you know?
No, you
There's no way to avoid it
No,
sometimes.
you don't. There is no way to avoid it is the thing, and dealing with those tragedy parts is a part that's beyond the scope of this class. I don't know how you do that. I have gone and cleaned up an employee's bedroom, so his mom, who also was an employee, didn't have to see it after he killed himself. And we don't wanna have to deal with those things, and it's a very sad part of humanity. Our best thing is to try to preempt, form those bonds and friendships. You've been involved in initiating a lot of those, and with people before there's a crisis, you know, catching them and you know, being part of the support team. That's way out of the scope of what I can qualified to teach. I can just say, as human beings, this is a reality that we have to deal with. On an easier level, scouting for the career lawsuiters, the career people that slip and fall in Walmart just so they can sue them. We have those people in our society. Hopefully, we weed them out and don't have them in our workforce, but we have some still, and we have to watch and be careful for that. Part of risk management is trying to identify those. Just like we've had training here on campus as faculty on trying to identify students that may be suicidal, and you know, that's not our job as a school, but it's our job as human beings to try to reach out to people that are in need. And we all have moments in our lives when we're in need. All of us have. Some seem to have them more than others. Just I live a blessed life and haven't had as many as some others people have had to deal with. That's a buzzkill late in the day. I'm
Sorry.
about that.
That was just one of the worst things we've had to deal with.
I can't imagine. I really can't.
We had to go to court against him, you know, and then that happened. It was just a big mind blower, you know, for everybody.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So we talked about contractual liability. We talked about indemnification at the racetrack at Las Vegas. You could sign off saying it ain't our fault if you hurt yourself. When you talk about liability, tort law and class action suits are all part of tort law. If we hurt a group of customers with our product, we may get a law firm that engages a class action against us, especially if we have a consumer product. You know, like that time when somebody put cyanide in the Tylenol and it got sold at the grocery store in Chicago. That involved a class action suit because lots of people had bought Tylenol and we're all freaked out that ours might have Tylenol, or cyanide in it. And so, you know, those are tort laws, and if we get to that level that we have a risk of something like that, my suggestion is to seek legal counsel immediately, for your company, not for you personally, but for your company, to say, hey, what do we need to do here to build a defense? We need to, you know, don't throw any documents away, produce, I just had an example. This is a side world that I live in, but this just was an email I got over the weekend from my lawyer. I had an email train that was proving commitment and contract with a customer for another business that I'm involved in, and the dispute is a few $1 million, so it's worth having lawyers involved in it and have some discussion about it. And I said, should I include in our legal shot across the bow the text rendition of the text back and forth between me and this individual? And my attorney said, no, don't include that now, because we are going to reference that, and if he can't produce it, that means they have destroyed evidence. We win. And so it was like, whoa, that's a strategy. So talk to your lawyer about stuff if you get involved. I wouldn't have thought of that. I would have included it right away and say, hey, here, see, you said this, you said that. We've got it in writing, what you said and committed to. And my attorney says, no, don't tell them now. We'll ask for it, and if they don't have it, then they've destroyed it. And it's like, wow, okay, that's interesting. So on these liability suits, we want to get professional assistance in something like that. One of the things that they will try to do is establish negligence on the part of the company. If they can say that we weren't doing proper things, then we are further at risk. There's a standard of what is reasonable by a prudent person. What would they do? That becomes a part of law. We'll hear that term if we get involved in cases where a doctor's doing something and what, you know, they show that it was reasonable. They claim we didn't do something right. We show it's reasonable. Every cabinet shop in the world manages their CNC machine this way. We were reasonable in what we did, in the protections we set up, the training we offered, and that's evidence and proof in our favor of risk management in that scenario. Compensatory damages is the extra whammy that the opponent will go for when they attack the company, when they sue the company. They will go for direct damages. You pay for my hospitalization, my stitches, but compensatory damages is punitive damages. Because you're just bad guys and I don't like you anymore, I want an extra $10 million. Where did that come from? It's a punishment we're asking the court to give, and the court might. and so unless we are building a case that says that these aren't appropriate for, we don't deserve those kinds of things. And you don't know with a court which way they're going to go. We need to be aware that those will be economic damages, but there'll be non-economic damages as well, and that's where we get the pain and suffering and mental anguish and wakes me up in the middle of the night. Again, claims that you can't support. They can't support. You can't prove that they're not. You can prove that somebody's not waking up in the middle of the night in a dream about your company. You can't prove that that's not the case. I'm so afraid of my boss, that they chase me in my dreams, and a court might listen to that. Especially if they provide a recording of you screaming or shouting at them once, which they might have done. Their cell phones are active and they're in the front pockets of many employees. And so understand that we may be recorded, and they may use that and say, I'm now in fear. And on the fair side of that, sometimes people are in fear, legitimately. We see that in domestic cases more often than we see it in business cases. But we still, it's the bad side of humanity. Where we wanted to go after a break is I want to talk about product liability. And so here we are. The product liability that we have is that we may have goofed it up when we built it. We had a plane crashed with a fan on a jet engine on the tail of a which one is it? Has two engines on the tail. Help me out. I don't know. One of them has 2 engines on the tail, not under the wing. The wing's clear under the wing. And I think it's I don't know what it is. But anyway, one of those fans came apart. The titanium fans came apart, came through the engine, the passenger compartment, killed somebody in a passenger plane crash, killed more people in a plane crash. And the defect was ultimately found to be that titanium fan disc that was manufactured in Utah, in northern Utah, by a company by the name GFC. That had a defect the size of the ball in a Bic pen, and in one of the blades, and that defect caused the blade to come apart at high revolution as the fan blade aged, and it caused a plane crash. That company had to defend that manufacturing defect. That defect had a severe thing to it. And you go, how did they prove that that was it? Well, the Transportation Safety Board has resources, all the resources of the United States Congress to investigate plane crashes. So they get all the pieces, take them all apart. They found the blemish in the fan, and they root caused the fan coming apart based on that piece that was manufactured wrong.
717.
What was it, 717? All right, thank you. I knew there was one of them. Appreciate that. Google's awesome when it's listening. Mine's just gone on strike. We designed it wrong. We put a defect in the design. The way this thing was designed, it caused it to fail because it didn't have enough bolts on it, didn't have enough support. It was weak to start with. The lid snapped off because you could see that it was going to. And so that caused damages. So people go after us because we built it wrong or we designed it wrong. These are tough things. We may also make a marketing claim that they took us seriously, didn't think we were lying. So maybe we made a claim that wasn't true, or maybe we didn't warn them. Your baby could swallow this. Don't stand on the top step of the ladder, you could fall off. We have to put the label on there. Marketing has to put the label on the ladder. OSHA requires us to do that one. But that's an example where we can put the label on and we warn the public of the danger that might be there. And some of them are stupid. Don't put this bag over your baby's head. Really? It's like we have to tell people that? Well, we do, and in a couple of languages. We can't just do one. There's a reason for that. Yeah, that's not even a funny thing, but that is the way it is. So what we see is a bunch of sources of liability that where people can come after us. We've talked about those. We have the risks to personnel, the risks of not being able to work their whole life or not having made enough money because of injury or something that they put back on us. And I think that's the part I wanted us to talk about. Looking at the time, I don't think I want to finish out the remaining 18 slides on this. I wanted to talk about that part. I want us to watch a video that's looking at risk management. I want us to watch 2 or 3 of those, actually. At this point, I think we kind of have earned that. First one is just risk management in general. The TEDx talk, 10 minutes, we'll watch that. We'll look at how we do the matrix, because there's a reference to a risk management matrix that we will see in all of the ISO standards that you have in the handouts, and the COSO standard that you also have in the handouts on risk. And so I want us to be introduced to that before class is over today. And I want us to look at risk in climbing Mount Everest. And so we'll look at those 3 things and then we'll talk.
Welcome, everybody. It's great to be here. How many of you guys think these extreme skiers are crazy? Most of you, the stuff you see in the movies, right? Yeah, it certainly looks that way. I'm going to do my best today to dispel that myth. When I heard that the theme of this talk was risk versus reward, I was really excited because I live in a world that's pretty much defined by risk and reward. In fact, I would say it defines my life, my profession. I'm out there doing dangerous things all the time. And some time ago, maybe as I started getting older, maybe 10 years ago, I started thinking more about how to manage risk. And we all want to get to an ripe old age in life and be skiing with our grandchildren and make it through. And so I started kind of taking like a bit of an analytical approach to what I do as a skier so that I can hopefully make it through. So I'm going to talk a little bit about mastering the art of risk management as it comes to, as we deal with the mountains. And I'm going to use a trip that I did, that I guided on Mount Everest last year, just about a year ago, to sort of frame the structure for this conversation. So what is risk? I mean, we all know the word. Probably use it. You know what a risky thing is, but really, what is the definition of risk? For me, it's an action or an activity that has the potential to go wrong. Okay, and it can be so many different things. It can be a ski run, could be a mountain climb, could be a business deal, could be an investment, could be a relationship. I mean, there's so many different things that can be risky. It's kind of risky standing up here on stage right now. I could totally blow it. But, you know, what's the worst that could happen? Maybe I'd be embarrassed. So once we know what risk really is, we can think about why we as humans take risk. I mean, it's sort of illogical. We should want to preserve ourselves so we get to that ripe old age, but no. Humans love taking risks. Why? It's exciting. It's fun to blast down the mountain and feel the powder snow in your face. It's fun to climb a 14er. It's fun. It's a thrill. It's adrenaline to be out doing these kind of sports. We take risks to make money. We take risks to bolster our reputation or our image. All sorts of reasons out there that we would take risks. I mean, but again, it's very illogical. Why sit at a gambling table and waste money? Well, because that time you win, your brain goes, oh, I really like that, even though the other 9 times out of 10 you lost. But this is sort of the quick and easy of why we go out and take risks. On Mount Everest, I chose to go there for pretty much all of those reasons. Yes, I was being paid as a guide, so there was the financial incentive. It was really fun, even though it's long and hard. It's really fun and exciting. And there was the possibility that it would enhance my reputation as a guide if we were successful. But on the opposite side of that, if you aren't successful, the risk of failure, coming back and not getting the summit is great, and there's a lot of other potential risks that I'll talk about in just a second. So how do we identify these things? When we go up on a Colorado 14er, or we go up on Mount Everest, we look at the mountains, and we have to open our eyes and our ears and all of our senses to soak up what we see, what we feel, and look around us. On Mount Everest, the risks are crevasses like this big crack that I'm skidding by here. You don't want to fall in that. You'll never come out. Avalanches, of course. I mean, just 2 weeks ago, the media was full of Mount Everest stories because there was a lot of accidents. People were getting hit by rock fall. People were falling. There was medical emergencies. There was all sorts of bad stuff happening. There was a lot of that comes from people that probably shouldn't be there in the first place. That's a risk that they choose to take, perhaps stepping outside of their comfort zone or over the boundaries of what they're capable of to go up to Mount Everest. Estimating the risk is really just an assessment of the probability of something happening. Now, we know bad things can happen. Lightning can strike, your car can crash, you can fall, an avalanche can happen, but will it happen? That's the important thing to understand. We know all this bad stuff, we've seen the risks in front of us, we've identified them, but will these things happen? And this is where your experience is huge. If you've climbed all the Colorado 14ers, you've gained a wealth of knowledge that you can use to make good decisions. If you've been in the banking business for 30 years, you have a wealth of knowledge and experience which you use to inform your decisions. For me, I've grown up as a skier in the mountains, so that's like the most comfortable place. I'm much more comfortable on top of a 14er than I am walking down a city street where I'm just, it's a little, I feel like I have less control. So estimating the risk, we're looking at what's the probability of something bad happening. Now, we want to manage these things. We know what the risks are. We know what the probability is, or at least we hope we know. We have to remember that we as human beings are not as smart as we like to think we are. Humans are capable of doing incredibly stupid things, and we never seem to learn from each other's mistakes. I mean, you can go back in history And everybody's done things wrong. Everybody's done everything wrong. We just haven't always learned from it, so we tend to repeat these mistakes. So there's an art to managing the risk, and I'm going to teach you or give you a tool that I created. It's sort of a methodology that I created, and I call it the MEAT method. And I wanted to put up a slide here of a steak, just because I thought it would be funny, but I didn't get around to doing that. I'm actually a vegetarian, so it's even funnier for me. But it's just an acronym. I could have called it the TEAM method, but MEAT was in the right order that I wanted. This is a picture of the South Col of Mount Everest, the high camp, and that's the summit in the distance. And so we're going to talk about what it was like to go from that high camp up to the summit and how we managed the risks that day. So the first thing you can do in the MEAT method is mitigate. And mitigate means just reducing the risk. It means tweaking the situation. So for instance, ski patrols on the ski area, they'll throw bombs in the morning after a big snowfall to try to get avalanches to come down the steeper terrain so they can safely open for the public. The Colorado Department of Transportation will go up on the highways and shoot their guns like on Loveland and Berthoud Pass to try to bring avalanches down before they open the highway if it's a dangerous scenario. We're trying to tweak the situation, reduce the hazard so that it is safer. The second thing, and this is a picture actually of the world's 4th highest mountain, taken at sunrise from about 28,000 feet on Everest, and this is Lhotse, which by the way has never been skied if anybody's looking for a really cool project. It's very risky though, very risky. So the second thing we can do is eliminate the risk altogether. What does that mean? Don't go, don't do it. On May 19th last year, we got up at about 8 p.m. at the South Col. We got out of our tents, got dressed, drank some food, drank some hot tea. It's about all you can stomach up there. And about 10 p.m. we started walking towards the summit. And it was a snowy night, it was windy, it wasn't good conditions. And we walked for about an hour, about 700 vertical feet. At about 27,000 feet, I looked at my client and one of the other guys and I was like, this doesn't feel good. I'm not liking the weather. It was really cold and windy and it was gonna be a long, hard climb. And I decided, along with one of the other guys, to take a chance, and it was a risky decision, to turn around and to go back to the South Col. And we had one chance to go the next night. We had enough oxygen to go the next night. And if we missed that opportunity, we were done. We were going back down. So we made the call to eliminate the hazard that night, go back down, safely sleep in our tents, try it again the next day. Fortunately, we woke up the next day, and it was absolutely gorgeous out. The sun was shining. We just relaxed all day long and did the same thing. Got up at 8 p.m., cooked, got dressed. We were out of the tent at 10, climbing. Gorgeous starry night with the moon out. It was the right call. So in this case, we were accepting of the risk. We felt good about the situation. Our bodies felt good. The conditions looked great. We said, you know what? This feels good. Our intuition, our gut instincts, those things that we've learned over all those years out in the mountains were telling us, game on, let's go. So here's a picture of my friend and another guide, Neil Beidelman, who many of you might know. He's Coloradan, who was involved in the John Krakauer's Into Thin Air book, The Disaster in '96. He was back on Everest with me for the first time in 15 years. Very different circumstances. We had great weather and great conditions. And this is him on the south summit of Mount Everest. And then the final acronym, the final letter in the acronym, as I climb up over the Hillary step here towards the summit of Everest, is transfer the risk. And transferring the risk is really just a fancy way of saying, you go first. Somebody else can take the risk. It makes perfect sense. Why not? Let's go see what will happen to someone else. I mean, do you guys remember being kids? Maybe you're standing up on a bridge over the water. You're waiting for someone to jump in first so you can see how hard it really was. Or perhaps skiing, you're waiting for someone to jump off that little cornice or cliff and see what the landing looks like. Transferring the risk is a good way to go. All right, I'm going to leave you with two quotes. One from the world Olympic champion skier Jean-Claude Killy. He said, to win, you have to risk losing. And another one that came to my mind last night, actually, was from the American poet T.S. Eliot. And he said, only those that are willing to go too far will understand how far they can possibly go. Thanks a lot, Denver. Appreciate it.
We have another look in a minute at Everest, but before that, I want to talk about the risk matrix a little bit. And this is the written form of what he went through mentally. And talked about there, doing an assessment. And as we do it's a requirement for many of our legal defenses if we are charged with negligence as a company. If we've gone through a risk matrix, we can at least say we thought about it. This is proof that we thought about it. We talked about it. We called it wrong, but we tried. And that alone will get us out of a fair amount of legal hot water in the litigation world, because our intent was not to be negligent. Our intent was to get it right. Our intent was to evaluate. Our intent was to decide how we could minimize the risk of a product or of a process that we're doing or the business that we are conducting. So the risk matrix.
Hello and welcome to this video on risk. We're going to have a look at what risk is and take a look at how to use a risk matrix. First of all, what is risk? Now, if you think about it, life is full of risks. From the time we wake up to the time we go to sleep, and even in between. For example, there are risks associated with breathing. Did you know that air pollution causes about 7 million deaths each year? There are risks associated with eating. Foodborne illness causes about 420,000 deaths each year. And then there's traveling. Road accidents cause over 3,000 deaths each day. In fact, every day we have to make constant decisions about the risks we face. Now, there are situations in which we need to know what the risk is from certain events so that appropriate action can be taken. For example, what's the risk to health from a new influenza virus, an industrial chemical accident, or a bushfire? But first, what exactly is risk? Risk can mean different things to different people and in different contexts. But in very simple terms, risk can be thought of as the product of how likely someone is to be exposed to something bad, a hazard, and the consequence, which is how bad the outcome will be. Let's have a look at an example. Say you have to cross a road, and you're trying to figure out what the risk associated with this is. Let's take a look at some different scenarios. In the first scenario, our hazard is a bicycle. Let's assume there are only bicycles allowed on this road. Let's also assume that the road is not that busy and there's only one bicycle every 5 minutes on that road. Now, because bicycles don't go on that road very often, the likelihood of the bicycle crashing into you is low, right? If the bicycle does crash into you, the consequence of that would be relatively low, wouldn't it? So in this scenario, the likelihood and the consequence are both low. Therefore, the overall risk is low. Now, obviously, if there are bicycles traveling more frequently, the likelihood of a crash would be higher. But the consequence, if a bicycle did crash into you, would still be low. But what if things were different? Let's change that bicycle to a truck. Now, with a truck passing every 5 minutes, the likelihood of a crash would still be low. However, the consequence is far more severe. Now, imagine if it was a busy truck route and trucks were going on this road very frequently. In this scenario, both the likelihood of a crash and the consequence will be high, which means that the overall risk would be high. You wouldn't even consider crossing this road, right? A simple way of visualizing this and figuring out the overall level of risk is by using a risk matrix. In a risk matrix, information about consequence and likelihood can be used to determine the overall level of risk. Let's have a look at a simple risk matrix. A risk matrix is basically a table or grid with a measure of likelihood on one side and consequence on the other, graded from low to high. The combination of the two, which is the overall level of risk, can be categorized as low, medium, or high, and color-coded. So let's get back to our example. In the scenario in which there are bikes traveling very infrequently, the likelihood is low and the consequence is low. Therefore, the overall risk is low. When there are more bikes, the likelihood is high, but the consequence is still low, and therefore the overall risk is medium. Let's consider the truck now. In the scenario where trucks are infrequent, the likelihood of a crash is low, but the consequence is high. The overall risk is medium. And if it's a busy truck route, the likelihood and consequence are both high, and therefore the overall risk is high. So that's how a risk matrix can be used to determine the overall level of risk using an assessment of likelihood and consequence. There are many different types of matrices in use with varying degrees of complexity. They can have many categories and different grades of risk. They may also have different ways of defining categories of likelihood and consequence. For example, a high likelihood may mean that it's expected to occur in most circumstances, and a low likelihood may mean that it may occur only very rarely, such as once in 100 years. With consequence, a high consequence may mean multiple deaths, and a low consequence may mean only minor injuries. So, the risk matrix and the categories that are used can vary, and therefore should be relevant to the situation and context in which the risk assessment is done. Regardless of this, risk matrices follow the same principle. Although risk matrices have their limitations, such as being subjective, not being consistently interpreted, and not taking time frames into consideration, they are a useful and practical tool to categorize risk. And that's an introduction to risk and how to use and interpret a risk matrix.
So the piece that they leave out of that risk matrix is there's another variable. I mean, they're probably getting other variables, but the variable, they're looking at what is the consequence of doing what you're doing, and what is the probability of that happening is what they're really looking at, those two things. The third piece that comes into play is how likely are you to detect the problem? So what if the trucks were invisible trucks? They were force fields that you couldn't see, and all of a sudden they might get you. That adds a different risk to it, the probability of detection. The risk of dying from cancer goes down if in the types of cancers where the likelihood is high that they can be detected. It's the colon cancers that there's no symptoms and they're not detected early that are the ones that are the most risk, right? Because they're hard to find. They're hard to detect. It's hard to know it's there until it's too late. And so as we do risk evaluation, we had a risk in Autoliv when we were making airbags there. Every now and then a employee would lose a wedding ring or their watch or something in an airbag. And it turns out, or car keys, there were keys in airbags. And it turns out that when you deploy an airbag with somebody's car keys in it, it becomes a bullet. And it will go through you. And people were killed with shrapnel that was in an airbag that shouldn't have been in there. So the issue of detection, how do you detect? So they made rules. You've got to take all your jewelry off, put it in your locker before you can go to the line. So there's less stuff that can fall into the airbag. But that mitigated the risk a bit. But the problem they had was they couldn't detect if something was in there. Once they folded up the airbag and sealed it up and had it in a steering wheel ready to go, what do you do? So detection became more difficult. They inspected it, but you couldn't see on visual inspection a lot of times if there was a bolt in there or a screw or something that had fallen out of the screwdriver. They could put things in the electric, or something came out of that, or the bit dropped off, or one of those things that kind of happened. So they put fluoroscopes in the line, X-ray machines basically, so they could look inside the airbag. But the issue of detection is the issue there. If something's hard to detect, your risk goes higher because it's easier to miss it. And so that matrix has a third dimension to it in that sense. And it's something that we need to talk about as we do the risk analysis. It's to talk about what are the consequences if the bad thing happens, how bad is it going to be, how severe is it going to be, and what's the probability of that occurring, and what's the probability of us detecting it and eliminating it through that. So those are the factors of risk that are important for us to have conversations, especially regarding product risk, the stuff we build, the stuff we make. It's possible for the bed to collapse. And if the bed collapses, you've had it happen, and if the bed collapses, what's the likelihood of somebody being killed? Well, it's that far of a drop. It's small unless the kids crawled under the bed, right? or if the kid pulls it and it comes crashing down on them, that's a risk that Wilding has addressed, has designed around, because you're taking something heavy that's stuck to the wall and you're pulling it on yourself, right? So there's a risk of being hurt in that, right? And so the risk management is addressing the ways you can get hurt doing that, the ways you can mitigate it from happening through your design, and then it's a simple matter at this point in time. We put a sticker on here that says, be careful, this will hurt you, and that helps. And we train them, that helps. But if the product still fails, and it failed because there was a crack in a structural piece, and we didn't pick that up. We didn't pick it up on the line, we didn't pick it up in shipping, we didn't pick it up in installation, but there was a very definite weakness there that was hard for us to see. We can have a bad consequence, but it was going to be hard to detect. So that becomes part of our risk management and our response to the risk management. The FDA in medical devices is going to see that we identified that crack could be there. We talked about how we will try to find it, and if we've had those conversations and we've implemented best available practices, we still haven't eliminated the risk, but we've lowered it, and we lowered the consequences from it. That's what the court is going to want to see, and in a FDA product, that's what the Food and Drug Administration is going to want to see, medical device. In aerospace, that's what the FAA is going to want to see, military is going to want to see, that we've done these things to assure that our product has lower risk associated to it, with it. We aren't able yet to be risk-free, but we are able to lower the risks and the consequences of the risk through various things. We put an alarm on the bed. Every time it starts to come down, it goes beep, 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 right? That's how we lowered risk with getting run over with a backhoe, right? Or a forklift. We do those kinds of things. All right, back to Mount Everest. This time, a little bit different, a little bit more information.
Well, I hope you all brought your coats, because in the next 18 minutes, or less, we're going to be climbing Mount Everest together. And what I want to do is share with you some of the lessons I learned while serving as the team captain for the first American Women's Everest Expedition. Thanks. Don't tweet right now, though, just a reminder. All right, the first thing I have to point out is that the route up Mount Everest is far from straightforward. You actually don't just climb from base camp to Camp 1 to Camp 2. It's not nearly that easy. You're going to spend about 10 days just hiking into base camp. Base camp is over 17,000 feet. And then you have to spend a few days at base camp getting used to the altitude. Now, once you spend a few nights at base camp, then you can climb up here to Camp 1. And you spend the night here at Camp 1, and then the next day, you come back down here to base camp again. You're going to spend a few nights at base camp again. Next day you climb up here to Camp 1 and spend the night. Next day you climb up here to Camp 2 and you spend the night at Camp 2. And then the next day, come all the way back down to base camp. Spend a few nights at base camp again. Climb up to Camp 1 the next day, spend the night. Next day you're going to climb up here to Camp 2, spend the night. Next day you're going to spend about 9 or 10 hours finding your way up to Camp 3. You spend the night at Camp 3, it's almost 24,000 feet. And the next day, guess where you go? Yep, all the way back down to base camp. So the reason you have to keep coming back down to base camp is because you have to let your body get used to the altitude very slowly. It's this process called acclimatization. If someone were to magically drop you off on the summit of Mount Everest, if you could be dropped there by a plane or a helicopter or something like that, you would be dead in a matter of minutes from the altitude. So you have to move up this mountain really slowly so your head doesn't pop off when you get to the very top. I mean, it doesn't really pop off. But the catch is that anytime you're above about 18 or 19,000 feet, which is any camp above base camp, anytime you're above that elevation, your body is getting weaker and your muscles are starting to deteriorate. So it's this crazy catch-22 of wanting to spend time up high to get used to the altitude, but you have to keep coming back down low so you can eat, sleep, hydrate, and regain some strength. So not only is it very physically challenging to be going up and back down and up higher and back down again, but psychologically, it is super frustrating as well, just because intellectually you know that you want to be going this way, but you're spending a heck of a lot of time climbing in this direction. But what you have to remember is that even though you are going completely backwards, you're still making progress, right? Because you're helping your body acclimatize. And for some reason, we always think that progress has to occur in one particular direction. But that's just not the case. Sometimes you do have to go backwards in order to eventually get to where you want to be. This is just a shot of base camp on Mount Everest. Did anyone here see the movie Vertical Limit? Yeah? Okay, well, it's nothing like that. There are no keg parties or bonfires or s'mores. It's just a bunch of rocks and some tents. However, the first part of the route, once you leave base camp, has a lot going on. And this is where most of the accidents occur on Mount Everest. This area is called the Khumbu Icefall. Khumbu Icefall is basically 2,000 vertical feet of these big, huge moving ice chunks. These ice chunks are massive. They're the size of houses. And this icefall is in constant motion. So what happens is, the sun comes up, everything starts to melt, these big, huge ice chunks start to shift around, so you are in constant danger of being crushed. Now, it's made more complicated by the fact that there are all these big, huge open crevasses everywhere where you can fall hundreds of feet to your death. So they span these rickety aluminum ladders across them so you can go from one side to the other without falling in. So between the big, huge moving ice chunks and the ladders and the open crevasses, it is a very scary part of the mountain. But it's also where I learned one of the best lessons about climbing anything, which is this. Fear is okay. Fear is okay, you guys. It's just a normal human emotion. Complacency is what will kill you. You have to be able to react to the environment as things are shifting and changing. This is a shot of the team at Camp 2. I am 5'4". I was the tallest one. Yeah, we were so short we had to have these down suits custom made. But we liked them because we thought they were kind of flattering. Here's a shot of the team heading up to Camp 3, up the steepest area of the route called the Lhotse Face. It's slick blue ice. You got to watch every step. All right, I put this picture in because it's a totally fake smile. And I actually puked all over myself right before they took this shot. This is 24,000 feet on the Lhotse Face. I had a banging headache, felt sick to my stomach. I absolutely hit the wall. I did not have 1 ounce of energy left. And when you're on an expedition like this, and you feel like you absolutely cannot go on, you have to dig down deep, right? And pull out one of these. It's just like an energy gel thing, right? I like the chocolate flavor. It's got some caffeine in it. Suck this down and you're on your way. Because guess what? You're on Mount Everest. Like, you can't quit. You have a responsibility to the people around you. You've got to get out there, suck it up, and do what you're supposed to do. So you carry one of these things with you. It's way easier to carry than like a sports psychologist or something like that. All right, dealing with change. This is just what you get when you go to the mountains. Everything is always changing. It's all this stuff you cannot control. The weather's kind of an obvious thing that changes, but you've got other stuff too. You've got the weather, your health, the health of the team, the conditions of your gear, the conditions of the route, things going on with other teams. All of these things are always changing. You don't know what's going to happen from one minute to the next. So sometimes you look up at the summit of Mount Everest and it looks like this. It looks like, you know, it might be pretty approachable, but within a matter of minutes, a summit can look like that. That's really intimidating. But one thing you know about these storms is that they are always temporary. Storms are always temporary. There's just no such thing as a storm that lasts forever. But the key to getting through that is being able to take action based on the situation and not based on some plan. Because whatever plan you came up with last year, last month, last week, even that day, plan's outdated as soon as it's finished in an environment that's always evolving. So you've got to focus much more on executing rather than sticking to some plan. All right, this is a shot of our team heading up to the high camp. This is me at the high camp. You are more than welcome to borrow this picture and tell people it's you. Nobody will ever know. All right, the high camp. It's at 26,000 feet on Mount Everest, also known as the death zone. They call it the death zone for a really good reason, and that's because at 26,000 feet, human life can no longer be sustained and your body is slowly starting to die. It starts to pull all the blood out of your fingers and toes and just focuses on keeping your core going, right? These vital organs, your heart, your lung, your brain. At this elevation, you're taking 5 to 10 breaths for every step. So it looks like this. You would take a step, and then you go. 5 to 10 times before you do this. Take another step. 5 to 10 breaths again before you do this. Okay, so if you ever think you're having a slow day, all right, so we get up to the high camp, we lay down for a couple of hours, 10:30 at night, we get out of our tent to start heading to the summit. Right? So it's 10:30, pitch dark, it's freezing cold, you wear a headlamp on your forehead, it's like a little flashlight so you can see down the trail. And I get out of my tent and I'm thinking, okay, we're at 26,000 feet, we need to be at 29,035 feet to be at the summit. That's more than 3,000 vertical feet alone that we need to cover. And I start doing the math, right? Like one step, 5 to 10 breaths, 3,000 plus vertical feet, and I start to get completely freaked out and intimidated, thinking there's just no way. So the only way I could really wrap my brain around what we had to do was by breaking this down into smaller parts. And I took my headlamp and I just shined it on a rock that I could see down the trail. And I stared at the rock and I thought, all right, I just need to make it to that rock. That's all I need to do. I'm just going to that rock, right? Step, 5 to 10 breaths. Step again, 5 to 10 breaths. Before I knew it, I made it to the rock. Then I'd take my headlamp and I would shine it on, a piece of ice, just anything else I could focus on. All right, I just need to make it there to that piece of ice. Step, 5 to 10 breaths. And I'd make it to the piece of ice. So every time I would think, oh man, I don't know if I can do this, I would think, all right, well, I didn't think I could make it to that last landmark, and I made it to that one. So maybe I could make it to one more. Maybe I could make it to one more after that. We climbed through the whole entire night that way. And by 6:30 in the morning, we were at a place called the South Summit, which is just below the true summit of Mount Everest. And at that point, storm clouds started to come in. So that's where we had to make a very tough call. So this is the summit of Mount Everest. This is about where we turned around to go down. Trust me when I tell you that turning around and walking away from the deal is harder than continuing on. But when you're up there in these mountains, you have to be able to make very tough decisions when the conditions around you are far from perfect. And you have to think about how every single move you make is going to affect everybody else around you and not just you. So it doesn't matter how much blood, sweat, and tears you put into something. The conditions aren't right. Turn around, cut your losses, and you walk away. Mount Everest is just a pile of rock and ice. You can always go back. But if you do something dumb up there, you may not have the opportunity to go back. And just so you know, too, it's just a couple hundred feet, but that would take us a few hours. Now you're shaking your head. You're like, you should have just, run and touch the top and run back down. You're taking 5 to 10 breaths for every step, right? So that was a few hours of climbing I mean, we didn't feel like we had that much time left of a decent weather window. So, spent 2 months on that mountain. That's where we called it quits. Game over. Head back down to base camp. So people ask me all the time if I'd ever want to go back to Mount Everest. And I mean, typically, my answer is always like, no, you know, I don't feel like after spending 2 months fighting my way up that mountain that I'm going to learn anything from going the last, few hundred feet. I mean, occasionally I'd get the urge to go back, and it was usually when someone was kind of giving me a hard time about the trip. And typically it would go down something like this. I would be at a dinner party or something, and the host of the party would be introducing me to the other guests, and he would say, "This is my friend Allison. She climbed Mount Everest." And the guy across the table from me would go, "Oh, no way, all the way to the top?" So then you have to say, well, no, actually, we turned around just a couple 100 feet from the top. "Oh, so you didn't climb Mount Everest?" I was like, no, like I explained the whole thing. We were on that mountain for 2 months, and we were doing great, but it came down to one bad, weather day, and that was it. We had to call it quits, and I gave him the whole spiel about getting to the top is optional. Getting down is mandatory. And he was like, "I don't care, like, if you weren't at the very top, like, you didn't climb it, it doesn't count." I was like, "Okay, what do you do, tough guy?" And he actually worked for J.P. Morgan. So he said, "Oh, I work for J.P. Morgan." And I said, "Oh, no way, you're the CEO of J.P. Morgan?" And he said, "No, I'm not the CEO. I work in fixed income trading." I'm like, "Well then, I guess you don't really work for J.P. Morgan then, do you? Because if you're not at the very top, then it doesn't count." And he was like, "It's totally different." But actually, I did end up changing my mind about going back because of my friend Meg. And it's a long story, but unfortunately, she passed away from a lung infection at age 37 in 2009. And I wanted to do something to honor her. So I went back to Mount Everest just last year, and I engraved her name on my ice axe, and I gave that mountain another shot. And that's me heading up over this area called the Geneva Spur on my way to the high camp. And then once I got up to high camp, go figure, I look up, and there are the clouds coming right over the summit again. And I thought, I can't believe I am back here in the same spot 8 years later with another storm coming in. And I thought, all right, I'm going to get out of my tent and just go part way. I don't think I'll get too far, but I at least have to put in a little effort here. So I started going toward the top, and the weather continued to deteriorate, started to dump snow, the winds picked up, and I saw all these headlamps out there on the route coming toward me, which meant they were people that started out a little bit before I did that were turning around and boarding their summit bid and heading down. And I thought, I don't think that I'm going to get too much further on this mountain, but I'm going to just see what's going to happen here. And you can see that the clouds did close in. Visibility was absolutely horrible. It's a 10,000-foot drop on this side of the summit ridge, and it's an 8,000-foot drop on that side. And again, I couldn't see too far in front of me, but sometimes I think you don't have to have total clarity in order to just put one foot in front of the other. So that's what I did, and I'm happy to report that on May 24th of just last year, 8 years after my failed attempt, I did make it to the summit of Mount Everest in honor of my friend Meg. Oh, thanks, you guys. Thanks. And for me, it was the completion of what's known as the Adventure Grand Slam, which is climbing the 7 summits, the highest peak on each continent, and skiing to both the North and South Pole. And people ask me all the time what that felt like. What did it feel like to fight your way up that mountain 8 years later and go through everything that you've gone through and finally stand on that summit? What was that like? And I can honestly tell you, it just wasn't that big of a deal. I mean, because come on, you guys, think about this for a second. It's just a mountain, and you're only up there for a few minutes. So standing up there for a couple of minutes doesn't change anything. I mean, I was up there for 30 minutes, which was considered a long time, but I promise you that plenty of better, stronger, much more deserving climbers than I am didn't make it that day for whatever reason. And the people that stand on the top of that mountain are no better than the people who turn around just short of the top, because the summit isn't important. What is important is the journey and the lessons that you learn along the way and how you're going to use those lessons to be better and stronger on the next mountain. And I know I did my absolute best when I stood on the summit of Mount Everest last year on May 24th. But there are always going to be more mountains to climb. So I know that going forward, I have to be even better. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure to be a part of TEDx. Thanks, you guys. Thank you.
So from a risk management perspective, what did she teach us?
Knowing to quit.
Say that again?
Knowing to quit.
Knowing when to quit. What was the gist of the quote that she said about making the top? What did she say? It's more important to make the bottom than it is to make the top. That's interesting. As we look at risk, it's more important that we live to fight another day than it is to win the risk. It's more important that we know how to get back to safe ground than to necessarily to win the risk. And that's something that an awful lot of, I'll take liberty to say, testosterone-filled people don't know when to quit, right? They take the risk no matter what. I got this. And it takes our business in a complete wrong direction. We're going to invest in it anyway. We're going to release the product anyway. We're going to ship it anyway. And those are risks that we shouldn't take. Those are days we ought to go back to base camp and get it right, wait till it's right, or abort altogether and put together a new product line, put together a new marketplace before you're done, before it takes you out of business. That's the thing that we want to hear in that. Interesting story, interesting interpretation. I talked to, we had him here at the college one time, a guy that climbed Mount Everest and he's totally blind. And he talked about the risk of those crevasses that you saw them crossing in their aluminum ladders. And he said he had great advantage over everybody else because he couldn't see how far he was going to fall. And so he wasn't afraid. And he got no vertigo looking over the edge. I look over the edge and it's like, oh, I mean, I can't even look at pictures over the edge. You know, I don't much less go there. I don't want to do that. And he said being blind was an advantage in that sense. He also said that his name was Eric, I just almost told you his name. He's written about that and so forth. We had a chance to have him visit us here at school. And he talked about all of those trips back. You actually climbed the mountain 10 or 15 times in essence, except for that last bit, because you keep going up and coming back, going up and coming back. And it's like, you know, she said that she was 60 days on the mountain. And that's a long time to be there. That's a lot of days to call in sick, you know, for one thing. So you got to, I mean, the permit cost $75,000 to climb. The last I saw, I don't know what it is at this point, but the last one, that's what it cost. But what he said was, from all those trips going up and back, up and back, up and back, what it gave you was confidence that you could bail if you had to. If you ran out of oxygen or ran low, something happened, you try to keep someone else alive, and you got to get back to base camp where there's more oxygen. You've done it so many times, you now know that part. It's no longer exploratory. Going up is all exploratory because you've not been there before, but you've been on the way down, and you've done it in the direction of the way down. And so therefore you're familiar with, and you can bail off the mountain much faster because you know what, you know, there's still all the risks, but you know it because you've retreated before. And there was some lesson in risk management with that, of saying, knowing the way back home, knowing the way back safe, knowing the way back to putting your business back together the way it was, getting back to the market that you were in, getting back to your core product line that you were safe with. I remember talking to the guys at St. George Steel one time about after they'd done some bridges, and they said, we're not really a bridge building company. And you know, all of the vouchers and the traceability and documentation for every piece and every weld and every certification that had to be, and when you build a bridge, the risks are much higher. We don't want bridges falling down, right? And so they've got to be built right the first time, every time. And to document that costs a lot more money. And so for the company to go, hey, let's get back in the refractory business, the refinery business, which was the segment that they were in. This is before you guys bought them. And sometimes we need to do that. We take the risk of a new market, and as we get in it, we realize there were factors that we weren't aware of. And to be good at it, to be great at it, to be profitable at it, we maybe need to go back to the base camp. And instead of just slugging it out until we win or go out of business, increases our chances of going out of business, right? And never getting it right, never getting off Mount Everest. The number of people that die on Mount Everest or have died over history is quite staggering, that we still think we ought to climb it. And then the Sherpas, they climb it every day. Well, not really every day, but they live on the mountain, right? They've climbed it, there are Sherpas out there that have climbed it 200-300 times. And that's what they get paid to do. And so for them, it's not a big adventure. For us, it's a lifetime, once-in-a-lifetime event. It's what they do for a job. They have learned to manage that risk differently. Their body has acclimated, as you heard, to the risk that they're assessing themselves to every day. We can get in that position as a company where we see players in our business that are able to do stuff that's super risky for me, but they've done it so many times, they can do it and can do it well. If they're not the talent on our team, we got the wrong team, and we're liable to lose, right? We're liable to run out of oxygen on Mount Everest if that's the case. So what I want you to do homework-wise, this standard that says 14,971, it's got a lot of pages. I don't want you to read the pages. I want you to flip and look. I want you to start on section 4, which says general requirements for risk management. And that starts on page 7. And I want you simply to flip through the 4 different .A, .1, .2, .3, get to the sections. Each of the sections, and if you're interested, there are 10 sections. So you're looking at 4 through 10, and the last 10 sections on page 15. So it's not that many pages. If you want to read about the rationale, the next section of that document addresses the rationale for each of those sections of why it's a requirement to include that in a international risk management standard. This one is risk management for the medical device business. The 27,001 is specifically for cybersecurity, for technology risk, and 31,000 is for risk management in general, and 47,000 is the one that I didn't bring with me because I couldn't find my copy, but I will, if I find it, I'll bring it as well. And I kind of want us to look at these 4 standards a little bit side by side. You also have a document called COSO, and that is an enterprise risk management standard. It is in parallel, but not in replacement of these other international ISO standards. And so what we are going to talk about on Thursday, just a tiny bit, is we're going to talk about risk management in a specific setting. Aerospace has risk management as well. We're going to look at it from a medical device perspective. We have a few medical device companies here in town, but it is reflective of what we all ought to be doing in terms of risk management from our product line. There are a number of products that S&S Steel does every day that have far more risk associated with it than a sanitary wipe that's a medical device to wipe the germs off of your arm. But it's regulated under this risk management standard. And so the risk management standard applies to all of us in terms of good common sense and way to manage and think through risk. And so I want you to kind of just flip at those, look at those 10 sections, or 4 through 10, 6 sections, and see what they're about. We'll notice that those same sections are in some of the other documents, and we'll talk a little bit more in depth with it. It is now 8:15. My bell rings. We will see you guys on Thursday. Thank you.